Welcome to CandleLight Audiobook. Chapter 141. Jessica, who brought Barry's letter, didn't look bright. She still seemed displeased to have let Barry go the same way. Celine, who roughly read a letter signed with a seal that she had sent from the Kingdom of Croa, said soothingly, "Jessica, you don't have to be so angry. But I still can't believe she went abroad safely after she did that terrible thing to you. How can I not love Jessica for her sake?" Celine, determined to give her a very big present when all was done, left the room for Alicia's judgment today. The Countess looked a little dark when she saw Celine on the first floor. "Celine, since the results are fixed anyway, I don't think you need to go." "Are you sure it's okay?" "Yes, they may need my testimony." It was already a set result. The Countess discouraged her because the victim did not have to attend, but Celine's determination to see Alicia's end was firm. Lyra's eyes were red and they were also swollen as if she had cried for days. She must have tried to cover them with her hat as much as she could, but she could not escape the eyes of Celine, who had watched her with the hawk's eyes. You want to scream that she didn't do it. It was obvious to see that she sometimes bit her lips and trembled. She might see Alicia's neck cut off. And the main enemy was right in front of her. "I'm not feeling well, so I'll leave in a little while." "Yeah, I guess you don't want to ride a carriage with me." Alicia had been taking care of Lyra since birth, and the Count understood her feelings and nodded to do it. As soon as he returned from the academy, a terrible thing happened, and Darian turned around and looked at Lyra and clicked his tongue. It was nowhere to be seen that he had cared so much about his sister in the past. The Count spoke to Celine in a friendly way that might be only for Lyra. "Celine, it's going to be hard, but hang in there a little." "Thank you." Inside, she wanted to hold a party and drink a toast, but ended up quietly answering, with a gentle smile. Thanks to Celine's acting of a poor girl, the road to the court was silent. Even after her arrival, she was able to play the heroine of the perfect tragedy with Darian's desperate escort. "Oh, my God, the victim, Lady Vermont is here." "Where?" "No, Lady Vermont is so beautiful." "It must be jealousy too, as it is rumored." She was really beautiful. Celine's appearance made a noise in the audience's seat. Her unadorned beauty added weight to her sorrow. Darian, who glances at her, asked with a very friendly face, "Are you all right?" "Yes." "Oh, yes. Of course." In the past, Darian's contemptuous eyes had been on her. The look in his eyes, which he had treated as if she had been a filth defaming the family's reputation. Celine, who shed tears that didn't seem to come, in everyone's sympathy, waited for the trial to begin. It took some time to start as she arrived a little early, and Lyra, who had a late start, appeared just before the trial began. "Your eyes are red, are you all right? Who did you cry that way for?" When Celine asked, Lyra closed her eyes and answered whether she didn't want to look at her. "It's all right." The Count and Darian, who knew the reason for her tears, sighed and looked away. The Countess held Celine's hand and gritted her teeth. Public opinion was so inclined that she could express her feelings. Celine understood that Alicia was precious to Lyra, but it was incomprehensible to cover up the woman who went so far as to kill her in front of the victim. "Foolishly, you've ruined what you've accomplished yourself." "Isn't she like her past self?" "This is her past self." Who knew she could not be recognized by anyone but could not control herself from being perverse? But in the eyes of the audience, Lyra's gloom and silence were seen as a result of her anxiety for her sister, Celine. Alicia was very thin when she saw her face after a long time. Seeing bruises and wounds visible in places, there seemed to have been violence in the course of interrogation. Her legs were limping, though feeble. The judge appeared as soon as she stood in the middle of the courtroom, with a puzzled look on her face. Celine didn't know the face and the name, but the judge was someone who succeeded in the blood of the imperial family. Other royal families, not related to the power struggle, had been holding high-ranking government posts in the capital due to lack of land. It was also aimed at the aristocratic party in Czech. The judge, who was seated, looked over the documents that had already been filed, and at the same time informed them of the beginning of the trial, and asked about her guilt. It was already due to the obvious results. Do you admit the sin of murdering Lady Vermont Celine? With her mouth shut, Alicia had no answer or movement. She just stared at the floor with her head down a little. Her attitude of refusing to acknowledge both evidence and witnesses chilled the judge's eyes. Let me ask you again. Do you admit it? She again gave no answer this time, so the judge shook her head with a sigh. It seemed that she was not happy to take the time because the trial had an evident result anyway. Okay, then I have to deal with it as it is on the document. She lifted her head when she signed something on the document. There was no reason to delay the trial anymore because the criminal's guilt was confirmed. So Celine thought it was over, but the judge looked around the hall and opened her mouth. Is Lady Vermont Celine here? Celine answered in a quiet voice, when her name was suddenly called. Yes? Oh, yes. Then the judge, who looked at Celine, stopped trying to say something and slowly frowned. When Celine cocked her head in wonder, the judge, who was staring at her for a long time, shook her head and began to ask some questions. Is it true that you have been harmed by Alicia, the sinner? Oh, yes. I heard so. Then do you intend to absolve her of her sins? Celine, who pretended to be sad about the ridiculous question, opened her eyes wide. The audience also stared at the judge with a face asking what kind of question she was asking. Celine was surprised not to answer, and the judge explained why. The dozens of petitions arrived in a short period of time. It was a petition for the forgiveness of the sinner sent by an anonymous majority. It was the first time I had received so many petitions, so I just asked if there was any other reason. She was also dumbfounded as she laughed, saying, no, there were dozens of petitions for the sinner who were already well assured. If she doubted that they were another accomplice, there was no problem. That was why she said it on purpose. There was some hope in Alicia's face. If it were Lyra, she would definitely forgive her sin in this situation. Even if she would forgive her sin, anyway, she would be severely punished for, according to the law. But she could avoid the death penalty, if Celine, who was the victim and an aristocrat, pardoned her. Celine, however, was different. She was not a kind of stupid, wicked woman who pretended to be blind and good. No, I don't intend to forgive Alicia's sins. She tried to hurt me for no reason, so I thought someone else might be the victim again. I just want her to pay the price. When Celine answered with a very sad face, some of the audience in their seat forgot about the time and place and gave admiration due to her strong emotions. The majority made a look as if it was right. And from among them, she saw Alicia in despair. Chapter 142. With her mouth wide open and eyes fixed on Alicia, she trembled as if she was about to fall. Therefore, it was not the Countess, but the Count that read her expression. I'll go first. She was displeased to her, but she was his biological daughter, so the Count rose up and said it would be better for him to go first. The Countess, without even giving a glance, replaced the answer by simply nodding her head quietly. Are you all right, Celine? Celine nodded, feeling the warm hand her mother was holding. Darian, who did not follow his father, also gave a worried look to Celine. The Count was also about to say something comforting, but he soon closed his mouth. He seemed to have decided it would be better to take Lyra and leave in a hurry. Alicia was looking this way, and Lyra was staring at her. Lyra. My God. It was then. Suddenly Lyra fell to the floor. The astonished Count hastened to support her, and the Countess, who had been ignoring her all the time, rushed to Lyra. With Darian's voice calling for a doctor, the audience seat became a mess in no time. You bitch. You wicked woman. It's all because of you. If it wasn't for you. Worthy of death. Arg. Alicia, who was watching this, cursed Celine, and was struck by a guard's fist. She also lost consciousness and was dragged out. What a pity that she would no longer be able to do evil for her master. Celine rushed to Lyra, who had fallen, and whispered in a very small voice, pretending to check her complexion. Lyra, a poor girl. Did you think I didn't know you'd get Alicia and Barry to poison my tea? Then she did not completely lose her senses, and Lyra's eyes opened in a flash. She stared at Celine, trembling and wondering what that meant. Her eyes were bloodshot and there was no beauty of an aristocratic lady, like when she had shed her own tears of blood from her own eyes, when she had been forced to just cry out in the face of her ridicule. How long have I been waiting for this? She had been waiting for this moment when she was going to give it all back to Lyra. The revenge against her was only beginning, but Celine's whole body was filled with great satisfaction. Now, why don't you cry like I did in the past and do your frantic attempts? In the comfort of others, Lyra came to her senses, and Celine also spoke with a disturbed face. Fortunately, Lyra woke up. But you'd better hurry up and let her see a doctor. Lyra held on her chest, breathing heavily in the chaos that she had never imagined that the foolish wicked woman would result. Celine was hoping Lyra would scream and spit out some cursing. Even in this situation where Alicia, who she had been following like her mother, would be executed, she did not show that much. In a way, Lyra must be a stronger woman than herself. The Count of Vermont. Lane appeared out of nowhere through the uproar. Then he urged the Count to hurry to the hospital he knew, saying it was nearby. Lane was a trustee of all the Count family, and they moved in perfect order at his words. Meanwhile, Lane whispered his original purpose in a voice small enough to be heard only by Celine. "There's someone waiting for you." Celine, realizing who Lane meant, nodded slowly. She wondered if he had been here since the beginning. Because he was worried? Or by realizing another true color of herself doing things this big? Darian, who watched Celine quietly leave her seat soon after taking advantage of the uproar, followed her with a strange look. Asher was waiting for Celine not too far away. Celine's steps to the place Lane told her were heavy. I wish he'd been worried, but what if it's not? As if she had been well versed in the court geography, fortunately there was no one in contact throughout the journey to the place Lane had informed. When there was not much left to the destination, someone suddenly called Celine's name. Celine. Darian? Surprised, Celine looked around for nothing. Why on earth did he follow her so far, leaving his poor sister alone? Darian also looked around once and said strangely, I don't think this is a way out. Ah. As she continued to move to places where there was no reason for the general public to look, Darian seemed to be following her and talking. She thought she had sneaked out alone, but Lane didn't stop Darian. Celine blamed Lane for the situation and changed the topic. What about Lyra? Is she all right? She didn't seem to be breathing very well. Darian frowned that he had read Celine's words about what he was doing here without caring for his younger sister. He seemed to think only now that he had just thrown out his sick sister and followed Celine. Unexpectedly, he stammered out an excuse. They said she's going to the hospital, so I'm sure she'll be okay. I don't think it's temporary because she's not even a child with a chronic disease. And my father went with her, so I'm sure she'll be fine. However, this could not be the reason to follow Celine. Whoever was next to Lyra, it was true that he followed his fake sister, who had moved away from the eyes of others rather than her own sick sister. I think it will be a big deal because it's not a chronic disease. She couldn't breathe well, so maybe she's got a dire illness. You have to stand by her. When she said, why don't you go to your sister because everything you have to do today is over? Darian couldn't answer for a moment and stared on the floor, because he realized what she meant. But Darian continued, that's true, but I don't think she'd get well if I go there, so I think I'd better go back with you in case I don't know. Asher will be waiting. He never stopped asking where she was going with useless excuses. She was unable to proudly say, I'm going to meet the Crown Prince, so when Celine delayed her answer and made an excuse for Lyra, he was even more determined to go back with her, as if his doubts had deepened. Darian, who glanced at something over Celine's shoulder, stiffened his face, as she was worried that Asher might just go back when the time was delayed. Don't tell me. As soon as he tried to look back on the idea that passed through his head, he heard the voice of Asher calling Celine's name earlier than the act. Lady Celine. His voice calling for the name was quite cold. It was like the first time she had met him in the general store, and for an instant her whole body was nervous. Who is it? Darian expressed strong hostility and vigilance at the sudden appearance of a mysterious man. Celine was also perplexed because she did not think about the situation the two were facing. And you? Asher's inquiring tone was very sharp. Darian was asking Celine, but she did not answer in difficulty, so Asher took it for her. I asked first. Darian answered, scanning up and down the appearance of Asher. Perhaps it was because he did not look like the crown prince, but as Darian was showing signs of discomfort as he retorted, Celine's face turned white. You don't even know how polite it is to introduce yourself first before asking about others. I know I don't have to be polite to the intruder. Suddenly, the two were in a war of nerves, so Celine rushed in. It was a very bad situation. Brother, I have an appointment with this man, so please go back to Lyra. You have an appointment with him? Darian asked again with disbelief when he heard that Celine had an appointment with a strange man. As soon as Asher saw him, he took a step closer to Celine's side and said, Now it's clear who's the intruder. Asher triumphantly said as if it was not a big thing. It looked so childish and she was about to say that he should leave now, but Darian suddenly grabbed Celine by her wrist and pulled her towards him. No, I can't have Celine, who's not yet an adult, alone with a man who I don't even know who he is. Celine was quickly dragged to Darian's side. He hid Celine behind him as if she belonged to him. The pain was so severe that her eyebrows were frowned upon by the harsh movements and the strong force that vigorously pulled her. Chapter 143. She became angry at this rude act, and one step faster than that, Asher took hold of Darian's arm as quickly as possible, which had seized Celine's wrist, and said, That's not up to you, is it? And now you don't even seem to realize how threatening it is to her. Darian bit his lip and loosened the force he gave to his hand when he saw that Celine's wrist was losing color. Celine, who pulled out her captured hand, stepped back a few steps. She then told Darian with a wary stare, I just want you to go back. I'm going to go back, with Mr. Pinonua. I want you to take care of poor Lyra and be by her side. Celine turned away after leaving such cold words. Celine got out of the way, holding the arms of Asher, who was a little embarrassed by what she called him, Mr. Pinonua. Darian's angry eyes followed the image of Celine and Asher as they disappeared. Celine, who had remained silent long after passing the appointed place and continued walking through the corridor, did not stop. Asher looked at her and said, Mr. Pinonua. Are you talking about me? Then Celine, who had stopped walking, looked at him and said, Yes, weren't you Pinonua Louis? You still remember that name? Asher slightly smiled. He seemed to think he had met Celine only once under that name, but in fact, she was the investor, so she exchanged letters with Asher under the pseudonym of Pinonua Louis over and over again. But she knew the whole situation, so she didn't mean to blame it. She just wanted a way to avoid it. In front of Darian, he couldn't identify himself as the crown prince. Moreover, it was Celine's turn to hide her identity. She then changed the topic. But why did you come here? I was worried about you. Asher was really worried about her. I've met the judge before, and she knew my identity, so I couldn't go to court, so I've been waiting outside. If you come to court, you'll face the real culprit. The real culprit. When he found out that Barry had been released safely, he did not ask questions about it. Rather, he was worried. Perhaps that was why questions that had been hovering around her head had become bigger and more unstable. Does he really know who I am? Why is he treating me so tenderly? How long can I see him while hiding my inner thoughts? Mr. Asher. I think you don't know me that much. He replied, noting the meaningful answer. Then you can tell me from now on. The honest, straight answer and glance meant that he would accept whatever real intention she might be hiding. Even if I'm actually a terrible, gossip-like wicked woman? I'm not the same on the outside. No, I don't know if such a person exists in the world. He added that he was also the original character when he had first seen Celine in the general store. Celine's eyes shook as she recalled the cold, blunt and rough figure she had seen. In addition, the image of many people, who had been different on the outside and on the inside, also came to mind. Isn't Alicia the one who will disappear through execution? As a sudden realization struck Celine, she lost her mind in silence. He recalled his encounter with her in the general store and hurriedly added an excuse, worried that she might be scared. Of course, I'm the one that I'm showing you. I think that any shape I made is myself. It's just different depending on time and place. Celine gazed hard at Asher, who continued to talk. The anxiety and doubt that stood in her eyes suddenly disappeared. It might sound like he didn't know the truth, but that was enough comforting, and it was also the answer she most wanted. After making excuses, Asher, who had been staring at Celine's eyes long before her anxiety and doubt disappeared, handed over her hair. On the other hand, I hope you will be what you're rumored to be. I think there's too much junk around you. Celine's face glowed with deep emotion in his eyes. At the same time, Celine, who understood what he was referring to, made an excuse for misunderstanding. As you know, he's just a brother to me. He's family. That's not all I'm saying. He didn't seem to like Celine's occasional appearance at a gathering of people, drawing people's attention. Celine, who had no idea what he was thinking about because of his vague words, tried hard to figure it out. I think it's better for you to go back now, Asher said as he watched Celine with a soft look. I'd love to talk about this and that. Asher swallowed his following words. But even if he didn't say it, Celine nodded calmly because she knew in the letter how busy he was with the establishment of the new academy. Then, I hope to see you again soon. Asher would always kiss the back of her hand before he set off. Leaving behind the regret of a brief encounter that ended with a dripping lip from the back of her hand, she went back to the mansion in a carriage prepared by Asher. Lyra, who was unconscious while Celine hoped she approached closer to her death in each passing day, came to her senses while being taken to the hospital, and, thanks to that, she had been resting in the mansion. The doctor said Lyra had a temporary breathing problem due to the shock and advised her to relax for a while. But if she had intended to save her by taking advantage of the little time left before Alicia's execution, Lyra led her weak body and forced her to go out several times. She didn't even know what others thought of her for her excessive behavior. It's already too late. After finally seeing Alicia's end with that beautiful green eyes without finding any way, Lyra began to spend the day dazed as if she were out of her mind. There was no more Lyra, who had always won the yearning and respect of the maids with her elegant gestures and sparkling eyes. Alicia's absence, who had protected Lyra from the day she was born, was enough to make her a soulless empty shell. Lyra's actions were enough to make her maids nervous. My God, how many hours has she been standing there? At Celine's question, the maids waiting in front of Lyra's room shook their heads in astonishment. Lyra must have locked the door, so they couldn't even clean it. Next to them was a maid with a light meal. She was a close aide of Lyra's but still unable to take a step into her room, and her eyes were flushed. Is there a better chance? Celine recommended warm tea for the girls, who were having a hard time. Tea? It's because you look exhausted. I think you should take a break. Ah. There was something they needed to do, and they showed a sign of trouble. Lyra neither allowed nor refused, so they had to wait for an answer all the time. Besides, drinking tea with their master? It was rumored that Annie and Jessica were doing so, but it was a faraway world from those who had always worked as Lyra's maids. When they hesitated, Celine stretched out her hand of temptation again. If anyone asks, I will say that I had something to do and called you, so you should all take some rest. Celine was so friendly to them that the impressed maid's cheeks blushed. Soon, her reputation began to change little by little as the stories of those who had favored Celine spread in the mansion. Before that, Alicia's vacancy was the biggest that overwhelmed and led them. So Lyra's close aides gradually turned their minds to sweet temptation as the poison spread little by little. Inside the mansion, the flow was quietly changing, so no one had noticed it yet. Well, do you really want to give this to us? The maids asked one by one, holding some cosmetics in their hands that added color to their lips. As Annie nodded triumphantly on Celine's behalf, the maids screamed a little and immediately opened the lid of the cosmetics to identify the scent and color. Oh my God, this precious thing. Celine, who smiled benevolently at the admiring girls, took a sip of her tea. She didn't buy it to give it to them. One of the businessmen, who she had invested in as investor A, had just sent a large quantity of this and that, saying that they were cosmetics he made. Chapter 144. She didn't know if there was a word made by Baron Berboom, but the gifts were things that all women would like. Other eye-catching cosmetics, perfumes, and luxurious pouches were displayed as if they were displayed within the eyes of the maids. Situated in tens of units instead of one or two, they were enough to arouse the attention and greed of the maids. "Miss, I have a question. Why on earth did you buy so many of these precious things?" When a curious maid asked her so, Annie answered instead of Celine as if she were foolish. "Do you think Miss Celine bought those? It's natural that she got a gift. That's how difficult it is to deal with." Ah. As Annie said, some of the items were sent by men who really liked her, but most of those who had the same kind in large quantities were gifts. Annie knew it all but added a bluff as she wanted to make her master look good. Celine looked at Annie with a satisfied smile. All the gold and silver coins she had invested in Annie had been so desirable. Of course, it was true that she had received the gift, so she didn't lie. The maids looked at Celine enjoying tea with their eyes glistening. The look was not just about respect for the elegant, prestigious noblewoman. There were envy and longing for the woman who overcame her humble origin, which could be seen as much lower than them, and who charmed the men of the empire with her beautiful appearance and fine character. And Miss Celine often takes care of these things by giving them to her maids. This many is just too much for her. There also existed jealousy for Annie, who transformed her form from a naughty girl to an elegant woman in just a year. There had come out some words at first as she had betrayed Lyra and had been attached to Celine, but in the end, the winner was her. Wasn't she enjoying life as much as a noblewoman? And now she might really be elevated to aristocracy. It was because there were rumors among the public that she was meeting with the successful Baron Berboom because of Celine's help. So how could they not be envious? It was enough to turn her maid's eyes, thanks to Lyra, who had yet to wake up because of the shock of losing Alicia. They all wanted to be like Annie and like Celine. Oh, come to think of it, Miss Lyra took a walk in the garden this morning for a while. Within that time, we were able to clean her room. That's right. I accompanied her. She still couldn't talk, but she seemed a little refreshed. Maybe it's because of the letter. Letter? Yes. She got a letter from the princess. It's been a long time since the incident. As soon as I told her that she had a letter from the princess, she told me to go in her room right away. I was surprised. The maids, who were quick to understand, released the information to Celine. They seemed to realize that Annie had acted like that and had enjoyed a rich life, by selling her master, Lyra. Really? That's great. Celine replied with great joy. She did not come out of the room with all the efforts of the count who loved her but took a walk in a letter from the princess. Don't tell me anything about Oscar. Or if he is going to visit. That was all she could think of. Oscar was the only one she loved. Her love for him overshadowed her love for Alicia. I know it was the best thing to charm Oscar as expected. But after many efforts, it was over, and somehow the face of Asher came to mind, who put himself at the edge of a knife even against Darian, her brother. She had been embarrassed at the time, but it wasn't a bad mood to think about it again. No, rather. She felt a bit of pleasure, thinking about it. Celine did not hide her smile from the feelings and information about Lyra the maids told her, and a very small gift was given to the maids. I'll ask you well in the future. I want to help the poor Lyra, but unfortunately, I have dark ears. Yes, yes. Miss. When they realized that the power of wealth in their hands was greater than the satisfaction of having a proud master, they came to Celine every day. Wait. Yes? Darian called Annie, who had just come back. She was heading to Celine's room with letters from young businessmen. Annie took something in her bosom, and he took it strange to see her smiling as if she were in a good mood. Darian asked Annie. Why are you carrying so much? Yes. It wasn't such a surprising question, but Darian frowned at the excessive response of Annie. Don't tell me, it's Mr. Pinonua. Pinonua? Annie cocked her head to the unexpected name. Why did the name of Pinocchio Louis suddenly came out? He was just one of many businessmen. Darian, who read Annie's expression, asked again, feeling a little relieved. Is there anyone else? It's personal. Even so, when Celine was hiding it from the outside, she was perplexed again, and Darian, who was considering something, asked again, Did you meet with that young baron? Annie nodded quickly at his wrong assumption. Rather than making lame excuses, it was better to affirm as he misunderstood. Then Darian, who returned with an expressionless face, said, Go now. Yes. Oh, by the way. She thought his questioning was over, but Darian called Annie again. The startled Annie jumped up and turned her stiff head, and Darian asked again about Pinocchio. How often does that Pinocchio meet with Celine? Mr. Pinocchio? I don't know. I don't think she's ever seen him. When she answered there, Darian released Annie, and she hurried to Celine's room. Celine asked why as Annie walked in with a short breath. Well, Mr. Darian asked something strange. What? Mr. Pinocchio. He asked me if you are seeing him often. I don't know why he's wondering. He asked me if the letter I brought was from him. Celine frowned at her answer. Since the day of his encounter with Asher, he had only a strange look in his eyes, but she was worried as he would not question her otherwise, but he seemed to have asked the maids, not Celine. What should I do? It was impossible to reveal the true identity of Asher. It wasn't because he was the crown prince. Isn't he the crown prince who broke up the aristocratic party one by one, and let the princess clench her teeth and darken the count's face? She read the letters Annie brought in agony. As usual, there was a list of new businessmen who wanted to report and recommend a business. After reading them carefully, she got her hands on the last letter. It was a letter from Asher, which came in having the name of Pinocchio Louis. I think we'll be ready soon. May I ask you a favor in response? Celine's eyes shook after reading the passage. He was asking her to show up for completion. Is it really okay to reveal myself now? She thought she needed to be more careful. Can I deal with Lyra and the princess behind her even if I reveal who I am? What he said suddenly came to her mind. He said he wanted to have me near. I think it's possible if I use Asher. Somehow she felt uncomfortable. She could not make up her mind about using him, like Oscar, even though she knew he liked her. It was a strange feeling for Celine, but Celine's troubles had been ruined by Darian's remarks. The Pinocchio family isn't fit for Celine. The Count and Countess, who were eating, opened their eyes and asked why since he suddenly mentioned the Pinocchio family. Celine also blinked with embarrassment. She didn't know he would say it in a place like this. The man Celine is meeting. Is Celine meeting Pinocchio? The attention to Darian went back to Celine. After a long period of time, she pretended to be in better shape and attended dinner, and suddenly she was faced with this situation. He seemed to have worked hard to investigate the family of Viscount Pinocchio, and Darian said, Celine should not meet with him, citing several reasons. Celine. Are you really meeting Pinocchio? Where on earth did you first meet him? The Countess, embarrassed by that, stammered and asked. The Count also stared at Celine with crumpled eyebrows as he realized that she did not have to meet the nobleman in the periphery, who proved her worth more than she had in the past. Chapter 145. Celine, who was wondering what to say in this situation where everyone had a variety of misunderstandings, soon gave a vague answer that was neither negative nor positive. He's just a friend to me. Oh my gosh. The Countess' upper body staggered while she held her head with her hands. The Count also showed signs of discomfort by shaking his head as if he was not happy with it. I think you'd better reconsider, Celine. Celine replied with an innocent face, he's just a friend, so don't worry. I don't see him that often. I'm not interested in that yet. I'm glad to hear that, but... Well, maybe it's time to find the right person for Celine anyway. When the Count said so, the Countess was also positive and relieved, and suddenly, Darian was angry, saying, That's ridiculous. Celine is still young. Lyra had her mate since she was a lot younger. Darian also added as if he had realized that he had been talking nonsense and that she needed to be careful. It's dirty. Although he has no blood relation to her, how can he take such an attitude toward his sister who became a family member? It was true that she had used him, but she had never imagined that he would fall into such an ugly way. I'm saying that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Isn't he the same man as his father, who gave up his wife's seat to a prostitute despite everyone's opposition because of her appearance? The Count stared at Darian as if he was strange because he expressed feelings that were not seen to Lyra. The wise Countess, like Celine, glanced at Darian with contempt. Darian was in a hurry to eat, saving his words as if he was quite embarrassed by his feeling of going wild. I can't help it now that the Count reacts like this. Celine decided to move on, putting an end to what she had been thinking about. Since then, the Count had tried to find a mate with all his personal connections. It would be hard to match the family of the Duke, but it seemed to find a family with both power and money. He didn't even know it was pointless. As the Countess enthusiastically joined the effort, rumors quickly spread over the empire that the Vermont family's beautiful eldest daughter was looking for a mate. Because of this, Celine's mood became uncomfortable day by day. Are you really going to marry a man the Count picks? Asked Annie, who knew Celine's true self. Now that the Marquis of Vincent and Oscar had found their mate, they knew that any of the Empire's nobles would not be enough for Celine. Celine frowned and laid down the book she had been reading. Are you going to bother me, too? Oh, no, it's not. I don't think there's anyone in this empire who would suit you. Annie, who cringed, dodged her gaze. It might be an impure intention, but nothing had yet progressed as Darian rejected himself. However, at this rate, she would have to spend her precious time meeting useless men, and she was annoyed. It was something that she might even have to be engaged in. Do I have to use Asher, too? She thought so uncomfortably, but as rumors seemed to have spread, even Rain, who had stopped visiting, came to the mansion with a gift. Well, thank you for the other day. But what brings you here today? The Count, who had previously told her to meet with him, watched them like a hawk to see if he was interested in Celine. Soon after, however, he softened his face and welcomed Lane, when he made an excuse that there was a woman who promised a future. Are you really looking for a marriage partner like this? Lane asked Celine, avoiding the Count's eyes. The contents of the cup that Celine was holding shook slightly. Realizing that she felt very uncomfortable, Lane murmured, "Thank God," and hurried to give her the letter he had hidden. He's worried. She could tell without asking who it was. It must have been sent by Asher. He was so busy, but he was so attentive to the rumors that he even sent the letter through Lane, and she felt a little bit relieved from it. Lane spoke when he saw Celine's face, which was a little loosened. I don't know what you're thinking, but I personally think that you're a perfect fit for the most powerful person in the Empire. Your flattery is amazing. He's not here. Celine's sarcastically responding mouth was slightly raised. And when Darian, who had been watching their conversation for a long time, saw Celine's mouth gently rising, he argued to Lane with a frown. Pinot. I've never heard of the family before. It would be impossible for you to know every family in the world. Lane narrowed his eyes and scanned Darian, who was provoking him childishly. He could refute it very lightly because he had been minced under Asher for many years. There are a lot of families I don't need to know. That's what it is. However, it may be quite upsetting that all your family members know and trust except you alone. You may feel alienated. Darian, who felt attacked, clenched his teeth and tried to hide his mounting anger. He seemed to be looking for words to refute. However, Lane, who had already achieved his goal, left the mansion. He had no intention to deal with Darian anymore. Celine also hurried up to her room before anything started to happen. Darian's eyes were lewd after her. Even Annie and Jessica noticed that they could shrink. Lyra? As she was going up to the third floor, she came across Lyra, who was coming down the stairs and was dressed nicely. Celine had heard that Lyra went for a walk once in a while, but now she seemed to be able to go out. Her rough face had returned to normal, and her fine face was similar to the one before the incident. She could tell where she was going without asking. It was clear that her destination would be the Duke's mansion since she was beautifully dressed. "Will you be comforted by Oscar?" Celine called her, but there was no answer from Lyra. Moreover, a sharp, cold look, which she had never seen in her life, slowly swept through Celine from head to toe. It was the face of a wicked woman, who was so cheerful that she wanted to scream in a bad mood. "You look like you're going out, aren't you? Come back in time. Something terrible has happened recently. You know, like that scary thing you've been up to." A few people saw her, and even though she didn't have to, Celine deliberately mimicked as the more plausible, elder sister, and Lyra said, "You killed Alicia," and soon turned her head and went downstairs. Oh, my God, why would Miss Lyra act like that? Is there something wrong with her? I don't know, but I think she's not sick anymore. Annie and Jessica swept their arms as if they had gotten goosebumps. Isn't it a very desirable change? I hope you'll behave yourself in front of everyone. Celine went back to her room with a bright smile. "Miss, was the letter given to you by Mr. Lane? Why did Mr. Lane secretly give you a letter?" As she came back to her room and took out the letter, Annie asked Celine with her eyes wide open and groped. "He just delivered it to me." Her casual reply was quite relaxed after a long time, so the quick-witted Annie covered her mouth, saying, "No way." When she said Lane had delivered it, Annie thought Celine might be exchanging letters with his master. Celine, who made no other excuses because it was true, confirmed the letter from Asher. "This." Celine, who saw what was in the envelope, opened her eyes wide. There was a thin ring inside. The ring with sparkling diamonds and the unknown fine print engraved wasn't fancy but delicate. Celine carefully put the ring on her finger and read the contents. She felt different from the usual letter, which contained useless words as if he wanted to say something but couldn't do so. Still, she slowly read the contents but didn't miss a single letter, but she was forced to hold her breath while she was amazed by the tough handwriting written at the end. "I hope you don't forget me because I'm busy." He continued to use an indirect tone, but it seemed to be what he really wanted to tell her. "Oh my God," Celine said. Her face turned red in response to his childlike behavior. She wanted to reply, she really wanted to, but since Lane had already left, she just read the letter a few more times and kept it in her drawer. Chapter 146. Shortly thereafter, rumors circulated that the Crown Prince separated himself completely from the aristocratic party. It was rumored that he condemned the deep-rooted corruption of the aristocratic party and declared that he would clean it up. That was why the number of nobles who spared themselves was increasing, and the Count, who had not otherwise sinned but also the main figure of the aristocratic party, stayed in the mansion, forgetting to find a mate for Celine. It was an exquisite timing as if to relieve her anxiety. Thanks to that, Celine was relieved. "I think you should follow the princess to the end." She said she had other plans. Lyra, who was recovering at some point and was beginning to move in and out of the Duke's mansion, told the Count, who was in agony. It was the first dinner she had attended in a long time. Unlike before, her subdued eyes allowed Celine to guess her change. "Well, I've already been offered a proposal to unite the innocent nobles." However, the Count was skeptical. Not only that, but most of the nobles who did not commit any crime were the same. He meant that there was no need to get involved. It was because there were already many examples of breaking up and bankruptcy. In addition, the princess had been praised more than anyone else as a tool to subdue the crown prince, and now that she could not perform her role, it was wise to leave the sinking ship. The division of the aristocratic party accelerated as the Duke was about to give up trying to use her. "Father." Lyra raised her voice to call the Count, but the Count just ignored her and kept sipping his wine. He was a perfect example of a nobleman who could abandon his companion in order to keep his power, so he kept his mouth shut and continued to eat. "Lyra, your father is in trouble," Celine said soothingly on behalf of the Countess. Lyra responded to Celine, looking askance at her. "You're saying that because you don't know anything." The Count and Countess were surprised because of her strange reaction. They looked at Lyra with their eyes wide opened. It was a reply that Celine hoped and expected. Mila, who she had encountered once in a while, suddenly revealed her thorns and let out her poison. She seemed to realize that nothing could be achieved by pretending to be nice. But it wouldn't change. Celine smiled awkwardly with a pretty hurt face. "Ah, is that so? I think I was being presumptuous. I was just saying that you better obey your father's wishes for the peace of the family. Lyra, I think you'd better stop talking about this like Celine says." In rare cases, the Count sided with Celine. Lyra was nervous and Celine was apologetic. It looked as if the two were in a twist. The servants and maids, who had been waiting on, were of the same mind. After Alicia's incident, they thought Lyra had gotten weird, and they gossiped. "Lyra, I think our father will make a wise choice enough." Darian, who was listening quietly, also refused to take Lyra's side. In the end, the isolated Lyra left the dining room without even half emptying her long-awaited dinner. Stuck in her room and crying her eyes out, she headed straight to the Duke's mansion the next day at the break of dawn. The princess, who knew Lyra was in a bad shape, urged Oscar to please her. How could they? How could they do that? "I got a ring from Oscar." What she worried about most was Oscar's future. Oscar comforted Lyra, who was crying. "Don't worry so much. Probably we can change the public's opinion very soon." "Do you mean the princess is preparing?" Lyra blinked her eyes and asked. Oscar nodded and affirmed, "Yes. You can hear good news soon. Then we can convince the Count again. We can also gather the scattered aristocratic party again." When Lyra heard the explanation, she took out her handkerchief. She wiped off her fine eyes and straightened her face. "I'm sorry. It seems like I was a little nervous these days because a lot of bad things just keeps on happening." Oscar's expression dimmed subtly at the words, "bad things." He must have remembered what had happened to Celine not long ago, and the fact that it had a lot to do with his sister. Of course, this little girl in front of him was too. "You must be worried sick. You'd better have some warm tea and make yourself feel at home." He tried his best not to go against her mood. He could only do what his sister told him to do. He had no choice since he was lacking experience and the connections. His only option was to carry favors for her as if he was dead or to sharpen his sword for the sake of the occasion. He blamed himself for being so bad that he was named the successor to the Duke family, and he ordered his waiting servant to change her tea. "Thank you very much, Mr. Oscar." Lyra nodded with a blush at his tender affection. She was able to recover her happiness because he was nice to her in each passing day, and she was able to escape the pain of losing Alicia. She already realized that it wasn't because he purely liked her, but it was somehow good. There was nothing more she could wish for other than Oscar being around her. A few days later, the Duke sent a letter to the Count, not Lyra. It was a letter that arrived secretly at dawn, avoiding the public's attention. After reading the letter that arrived from the Duke's family, the Count had been in serious trouble for some time looking for information. He had also met frequently with other acquainted aristocrats. Sometimes they would visit the mansion of the Count, but they took Darian quietly to the lounge without even giving a formal greeting for what was so much to hide. What the hell is going on? Celine, suspicious of this, was standing on the first floor just in time for their return. It was already late at night when the Count and some aristocrats, who had come as guests and who had never thought there would be anyone else with them, tried to hide their astonished faces and avoided her gaze. "Celine, what are you doing here at this hour?" Darian, who followed the Count, also hurried to Celine's side in astonishment. He spread his clothes over Celine's rather light-looking interior suit and said, "Go upstairs quickly. I heard we had guests, but I'm sorry I didn't even say hello. But I think it was wrong for me to meet them like this. I'm sorry." When she said that it was not intentional, the afflicted cleared their throats loudly and denied it. One of the nobles said, casting a disagreeable glance at Celine, "I think it's an inevitable choice for the sake of this pretty and kind-hearted lady. If this continues..." I get it. I'm on my mind, so let's go back." The Count pushed the back of a young nobleman who was trying to say something. Darian and Celine were left in the hall because they went out the door together, saying, "Let's go back now because it's already late." So Celine's gaze went to Darian. Darien had been eyeing Celine's light interior suit since then. Then, at Celine's gaze, he was surprised and said, "Go up." "I'm worried." "You look busy too." Yeah, he'd know something. Celine, who changed her target, narrowed her distance to Darien because the Count and the nobles disappeared so quickly that she could not find any information. "I was sad because I couldn't see you even at dinner time." Far from being sad, she had been busy avoiding Darien's eyes every time she had run into him. As she changed her posture and approached suddenly, Darien's face heated up uncontrollably. It was an inevitable instinct. There won't be anything to worry about. Things will work out soon, so make sure you do what you wanted to do. Oh, maybe you should learn a foreign language. Well, you don't have to do it right away. Foreign language? Arya's eyes frowned faintly at Darien's advice. Suddenly, a foreign language. Are they all going to be exiled together? No matter how scattered they were by the Crown Prince's ruse, if the remaining nobles seek asylum in other countries at once, chaos will ensue within the empire. But if they do that, a war would break out, and they would never go that far unless they were crazy. Unable to guess what was going to happen, she tried to get more information from Darien, but after the Count returned from seeing the nobles off, she was forced to go up to her room. Chapter 147. What the hell are you up to? She thought about it, but she couldn't find the answer, so she stayed up all night and finally decided to use the hourglass, but she could find the answer the next morning. I decided to follow the choice of the princess. Are you serious? Lyra, who had a bright face for the first time in a long time, her eyes glittered all of a sudden. The choice of the princess? What choice did she make? The countess also stared at the Count, waiting for an explanation, not knowing the details. But the Count seemed to have no intention of explaining it further, and only ate quietly. Celine, unable to resist her curiosity, asked, "What choice?" "You'll find out soon." On behalf of the Count, Lyra answered triumphantly. The mischievous way of speaking gave Celine strength on her hands below the table. Lyra was much better in the past when she had pretended to be naive. Celine couldn't be sarcastic as she openly expressed her real intention. As expected, Lyra knew it. Since she was a close friend of the princess, she might have known what she was going to do before the Count. Lyra's sharp reply made Celine feel completely displeased, as she said Celine would know when everyone knew. Celine stared at Cain for an answer, but he also said, "I respect my father's choice." Yes, you don't have to explain to the stupid countess and her daughter. What a shame. Celine held Cain's arm as he left the dining room, vowing and pledging not to let the Count and Cain sit still when the day came when she would judge the princess and Lyra. What the hell is going on, brother? She was going to use the hourglass if she could. Of course, she thought her pathetic expression would work more on Cain, so when she first drew it, he looked very awkward. It's still a little bit. Every family except me and my mother knows. Don't tell me, my mother and I are not family? When asked, Cain said, "That can't be. It's just to prevent the possibility of information leaking out. In fact, you think we're not a family. Therefore, you despise your stepmother and blush at your stepsister's touch." As Celine shed tears with her increasingly somber face, Cain, who eventually succumbed, looked around, made sure no one was there and told the truth. "I think the Princess Julia is going to marry a foreign king." At his words, she dropped the box of the hourglass in her hand. Celine came back to her room and covered her sick head. She thought she would have joined hands with another country, but she didn't think that she would marry a king of another country. Will Mr. Asher be all right? It was the first thought, if Asher would be all right. Asher was first, rather than thinking that it was difficult to get revenge. Because she couldn't meet him easily, she tried to calm her anxiety by ruining an unused embroidered handkerchief. Is the feeling that Asher felt like? When he wants to see, he can't meet me and he wants to keep me around. Worried, Celine wrote a letter and sent it to Baron Bourbon, who knew her real identity, to create a chance to meet Pinocchio Louis. It would be okay to meet him at the store of Baron Bourbon, under the pretext of the accidental encounter. He would not doubt otherwise, as he had already seen her disappear with Asher. So she had been waiting for his reply, but surprisingly enough, before some news arrived from him, it was the Countess who arrived with a pale face. She also belatedly recognized the seriousness of the situation and grilled the Count to find out all the details. Deathly pale, the Countess made a proposal to Celine to go to a foreign country. "I won't be here. You know how I caught a chance, and I can't die like this. So why don't we leave together for a while?" "Huh. If things don't work out, I'm willing to divorce." Not married because she had loved the Count, she seemed willing to abandon him for her safe future. Celine gave a small nod as she thought it would be desirable because her mother didn't have anything else to protect herself. "Mother, you'd better do that. Then I'll have it ready as soon as possible, so if you have anything to sort out, hurry up." When the delighted Countess tried to turn around, Celine hastily gripped her arm. "Wait a minute. Do you have anything to say? You don't mean to stay, do you? I didn't know you are that good for the Count family." Perhaps she had no intention of abandoning her own daughter, but the Countess began to persuade Celine. Celine, who was wondering what to say, took her hand and said, "You need to be careful." And her face darkened. "It's not going to happen that fast. The princess will get married and then something will pop up. So we need to figure out the situation. How did you achieve that, and could you give up so easily?" Unlike the Countess, Celine, who still had a lot of work to do, had no intention of leaving the empire. Moreover, she was worried about Asher. She even thought it would be better if she could give the power she had achieved, if possible, and she would rather stick by the side of Asher, as she could use the hourglass. And most of all, there was also a need to bring down the judgment on the real wicked. No matter how extreme the situation might be, when she saw the calm attitude of Celine, the Countess noticed that she made too much fuss and left Celine's room with her last words while she was touching her hair. "I fully understand what you mean. But in the end, you'll find it better to leave the empire." Celine, of course, thought it would be wise to do so in order to save her life, but her mind had already tilted irrevocably in the opposite direction. Is it because rumors have yet to spread in the public? Asher did not send a letter to Celine. The good news was that he sent a reply to Investora. "I'm sorry, but I don't think I can meet you because I've been so busy lately. I'll see you on the Academy's completion day." Celine's expression stiffened after reading the reply, that she couldn't cry or laugh several times. She was also worried that he might be busy with the work of the princess. Maybe that was why he couldn't come to see her. "Are you really okay?" With the completion ceremony just around the corner, she would be able to meet him soon, but she didn't realize that it was so terrible that she couldn't see him right away. Her heart was stuffy. When she saw Celine's hand touching her chest, Jessica asked her with a worried look, "What's wrong with you? Do you want me to call a doctor?" "No, it's okay. But you don't look well, and you look tired." Celine, who had been buried deep in the sofa for a while, urged Jessica to rest, closed her eyes and thought, and soon resumed her posture. Those who had put her to death in the past were said to re-enrich themselves, but she was not allowed to stand by and watch. "Please get me a pen and a letter paper." "Yeah. I didn't have time to worry like this. I have to go ahead as planned. The time has come to bring all the things that had been accumulated under the table alone to the surface." Celine sent some letters to the outside and handed out the rest to the people of the mansion, including the Countess, and they frowned and asked what this was. "I really hope you'll be there. It's very important. It's not the Academy the Crown Prince is involved in, right?" The Count's face was very ugly. To him, who could be regarded as a key figure of the aristocratic party, the Crown Prince was the greatest enemy of all. He could not attend such a ceremony to celebrate the Crown Prince's new achievements. "I'm sorry, but I'm afraid I'll be busy. If it's important, I'll get it delivered later." Yes, maybe it was a wise choice. If he knew before his eyes that his new daughter had helped the enemy, there would be nothing worse. Of course, it was regrettable that she invited him for it, but it was an expected response. Can he stick to that attitude even after the completion ceremony? No matter how much she helped the Crown Prince, Celine had already built such a force that the Count's reaction was expected in the future. Chapter 148. I can't help it. I'll tell you later. Sister, you must be very free. Lyra, with the atmosphere on her back, said, looking suspiciously at her. The sharpness of her speech drew a moment's attention to Lyra. The Countess had a face that she wanted to scold her. You have got everything with just your natural status. In the past, she might have thrown a fork at her thinking so, but not anymore. Now she had the great things in her hand that stupid Lyra would never have in her life. What the hell are you thinking? How do you expect to attend such a place? Can't you see everyone's upset? Asked the Countess, who followed her into the room from the meal. She raised her voice as if she could not understand Celine's behavior. She must have thought Arya set a fire in this mess now. Celine, who closed her door and looked sideways, turned to the Countess with a serious look. Mother, don't worry. Celine? I'm sure it's not a bad choice. No, the Count's attitude would change. Lyra would no longer be able to belittle herself. Maybe she'll try to use me as her own. By chance, she only cooperated with the Crown Prince, as an investor, in creating the Academy, while Celine's forces themselves remained neutral. Although the political approach had been blocked up by Baron Burbum, the situation would be different after revealing her identity. Of course, I'll take Mr. Asher's side. You're so beautiful today, Mississippi. It's been a long time since you've decorated yourself like this, so you look like an angel. Celine, who gave a glance to Jessica, who said the obvious thing, looked at her through a mirror. Prearranged dresses and ornaments for today showed off all the splendor, blending with the more brilliant Celine's appearance, naturally melted. Lyra with elegant beauty and Julia with clear and beautiful appearance were difficult to digest. She had always been, but she was confident that she would not lose out to anyone as much as she looked. As Lyra with her status, she might have survived for more than 20 years in the past thanks to her born appearance. If it weren't for this weapon, I would have been murdered by Lyra before I turned 20. No one would have loved a prostitute's daughter, who had a nasty personality and nothing to catch their eye. Fortunately, however, she was born with an unparalleled appearance and now a self-made woman, so she had nothing to obstruct her. Celine, smiling at herself satisfactorily in a mirror, took Jessica and Annie, who were as beautifully decorated as she was, to the completion ceremony of the Academy she invested. I still don't understand why you're going here. The Countess, who accompanied her alone, said. Her face was still covered with dark clouds. But that dark face must soon contain surprise and joy, so Celine seized her mother's hand. Even though the Count was sure to be offended, she thanked her mother for attending this uncomfortable occasion for her daughter. Just wait a little while and you'll know. The Academy was located near the Imperial Castle, so they arrived quickly without much time to talk about it. Perhaps they wanted to show off the work of the Crown Prince, but at a glance, she could see a splendid building. My God! I feel like it was part of the Imperial Castle. The Countess got off from the carriage was amazed. Celine also struggled to pretend to be calm because she did not see the middle course and faced only the magnificent results. To have completed such a great building in a short period of time, I'm sure he's invested enough money. She looked around admiringly, and there were quite a few people gathered since the start of the ceremony was not long. The aristocrats in fine dress, as well as the commoners in plain clothes, were occasionally seen. You're here. Maybe he was waiting, but the Baron of Burbum who found Celine hurried to meet her. When he saw the breathtaking Celine, he could not speak for a moment, but soon came to his senses and introduced himself, and escorted the two. The Countess, who had never dreamed that Celine would have built a personal network outside, asked her, covering her mouth with a fan. Who is it? I've known him because of my business. It wasn't just the Countess who was surprised by her answer. Baron Burbum, who had been careful all the time, was surprised to hear the word business. Business? I've been bored and invested a little. It's not a big investment, it's a little bit of a hobby. The Countess accepted that she had invested a small amount of money in her hobby and had known the Baron of Burbum, as she said, and soon moved on with her steps. She seemed to think little of Celine because she had no expectations of her. Annie, who knew the situation, smiled unintentionally, and Jessica, who was not familiar with it, cocked her head. Baron Bourbon, who hastened to Celine, who walked ahead, asked carefully in a small voice that only she could hear. "What are you thinking?" "What?" "No, that's..." As he got closer, the scent of enchanting perfume came from Celine. Knowing that it was the perfume of some of the entrepreneurs, his heart pounded hard and his face blushed. When the Countess, who had been watching this, she gave him a warning by folding her fan loudly. "Mr. Baron, our Celine is still young." She didn't like to see him, as Baron dashed to Celine. Annie's eyes also turned fierce. So Baron Bourbon tried to make an excuse, but it was thwarted by a woman named Celine. Celine. Corinne. Even the Marquis. She thought they would be busy and couldn't come, but Corinne, who had received the letter, attended and greeted Celine with a bright smile. "It's been a long time. Are you feeling better now?" "Yes, thank you for taking the time when you are busy." The shy smile of Celine, who answered so, made Corinne stroke her soft hair a few times. It was a careful touch as if she was dealing with a precious child. "I'm glad I had time. The Marquis said he was curious about it, so we came together." Corinne must be worried. After greeting the Countess gently, they followed the instructions of the Baron of Bourbon. The large hall, built next to the main hall, was occupied in advance by nobles who had ties to the Crown Prince. When they saw the Marquis of Vincent first, their eyes widened, and then they opened their mouths to see Celine sitting behind them. It was the same for those who knew or who didn't know who she was. They looked puzzled as to how to respond to her excessive beauty. Then they realized that their gaze was disrespectful, and turned their heads as if to look away. "Lady Corinne is always full of grace." "That's too much, ma'am. Madam is still beautiful and I'm afraid I'll be compared." Unlike the simple engagement she had held earlier this year, the Countess did not hesitate to praise Celine's lovely friend, who would be formally married next year and become the Marquise. Leaving them behind, Celine found traces of Asher. He said he'd pass all the accomplishments over, but the letter said he'd meet her today, so he must have arrived. But as the wait was getting longer and the ceremony was about to begin, Asher did not show up. Baron Bourbon was also nervous, questioning him for not appearing. "We are in big trouble." Pinocchio Louis was going to make the opening speech. Neither Celine nor Asher were able to identify themselves, so the face of Bourbon, who had prepared for the ceremony, turned blue instead. "Don't tell me, the real Pinocchio Louis is showing up." At that time, Celine was also about to become nervous as she thought it would not be possible, but he did not show up. "Oh. He's here." From somewhere Asher showed up. He strolled up the stairs. Baron Bourbon, who managed to sweep his chest out of concern, shrugged his head and blurted his end of his speech, as if he realized he was different. "But why is he dressed up like that?" It was an unusual suit, embroidered in gold, white suits. The brooch on his chest was a royal seal with tulips as its source. It could not be worn by anyone other than the royal family. Bourbon's expression at the sight of it turned sour. "Miss. That's the one I saw last time at the Baron's shop." The completion ceremony began after everyone bowed to the Crown Prince's authority, and after he examined each of the faces of the VIPs and checked his force. Chapter 149. Thank you for coming here to celebrate the completion of the Empire's new academic institution. I'm Franz Asterope, who organized the academy today. When he recited his congratulatory speech, Baron Bourbon staggered as if he was about to fall. "You said you are Pinocchio Louis. That's why I treated you like that." At his appearance holding hands with Celine, Bourbon had made offensive remarks to the Crown Prince, and it was seen that his heart was crying within his face. He had yet to make an official appearance because he had yet to hold an adult ceremony, but it was right to show himself on his achievements. The quiet hall rang with the voice of Asher. "The academy, built in the capital city, will do its best to enhance the academic abilities of ordinary people, not aristocrats, and to secure the talent of business people, specifically." When he explained the purpose and direction of the academy's establishment, the participants' eyes were wide open. It was the first time for them to hear a proper explanation, though they had heard it roughly through the rumors. As usual, those who thought it was an institution for the nobility began to talk quietly, asking, is that really possible? As soon as he finished his explanation, Asher looked through the VIP hall once more, and after a very short period of silence, he mentioned Investor A. Of course, it was possible because there was a person who had been willing to invest. He apparently thought that Investor A did not attend the meeting because there was no new face among those that were present. At the end of the remark, there was silence in the hall. While Investor A should appear in line with this timing, no one had risen from their seats. Baron Burboom was even more shocked after knowing Asher's identity. Don't tell me, Celine was coming out. He didn't look so good that it wouldn't be strange to feel drowsy right away. Celine rose from her seat quietly, meeting the gaze of the Baron of Burboom. Celine? The Countess sitting next to her called her name. As she was sitting close to the podium, Asher's eyes were naturally directed to her. Meeting his questioning gaze, Celine slowly climbed the stairs next to the podium. Lady Celine? Celine, who suddenly rose to the top of the podium, was called carefully by Asher, questioning her name. Celine, who had a pompous look like a tall flower blooming on a cliff, held her dress with one hand and slowly bent her knees to pay tribute to the Crown Prince. Celine greeted Asher with a clear voice, who had a fine frown upon his inability to grasp her intentions. Thank you for inviting me to a noble place, Your Highness the Crown Prince. Don't tell me. Though he thought it was a ridiculous assumption, he stared at Celine with astonished eyes. Invitation? What? As he retorted back, blurry at the end of his speech, Celine added a little advice to him. Everybody's looking, Your Highness. Feeling unusual, Annie, who recognized him, also called Celine's name in a deadly pale face. He went up to the podium to see if the investor was present and glanced over the VIP hall for a while. Unexpectedly, Asher met her eyes and opened his eyes as if he was wondering, and he was convinced that she had attended to meet him, and then smiled at her. As Asher ascended to the podium, his aides who recognized him stood up and took a courtesy. Those who didn't know the reason also inferred his identity from his dress and created polite posture. You said the Crown Prince invested in this academy, and he must be the one. The Countess took a courtesy in admiration. No matter how bad he was with the aristocratic party, the royal family was in awe. Unlike the Count, it was due to her lack of interest in factional strife. Although the distance was a bit far away, any further indication of embarrassment must have made everyone aware. At Celine's pointing out, Asher finally regained his original look. However, he did not give any instructions or make any statements to Celine, who bent her knees to take an uncomfortable position, if he still seemed to be smeared with shock. In the end, she had no choice but to point out again his behavior of staring at her in silence. My leg hurts. You can stand up. Celine, who stood straight at Asher's permission and had her back upright, blinking her long, rich eyelashes, asked calmly as if nothing special had happened. May I speak on your behalf, Your Highness? You were so eager to find out who I was, but you kept your identity hidden. Obviously, if he were his usual self, he would immediately feel betrayed and angry toward his opponent. But he didn't take any of that feeling toward her, and Asher sighed inwardly. To Celine, with a strange but beautiful smile, he replaced the answer with a small nod of his head, and slowly stepped back from the podium to make room for Celine. There was still a mixture of complex emotions in the gaze of Asher, who followed her in impeccable graceful movements. Checking with his own eyes, he seemed not to reach yet a reality that Celine was the investor A. And it was not only Asher who was surprised. Why did Celine on earth? Even though it was not the place for her daughter to stand, she took the place in an imposing manner, and therefore, the Countess raised herself up quickly. She was about to run up the stage and drag her down. Annie shook his head in front of the Countess. Miss Celine is the right woman who can stand there. Her face was full of respect and joy. It was a different emotion that had admired and yearned Lyra. It was not a vague yearning for the woman who wielded what she had from the beginning, but a reverence for the woman who held the glory built in her hand. The Countess's wandering hands were left bewildered and getting emotionally carried away. What the hell is this? Celine. On the other hand, Corinne's voice, full of questions and worries, came out, and at the same time Celine, who stood on the stage, greeted the audience politely. The graceful figure was admired by the beholders. The half-fallen Baron of Bourbon stared at the podium, leaning against his chair. He seemed to have almost given up now, having been running on a wild foot to hide her identity. I'm Vermont Celine, who was introduced. It's known as Investor A in public. She heard a small scream somewhere. Celine, who had intended to give everyone time to admire and marvel, paused, and turned to the source of the sound. Oh, that's the lady I met at the meeting. Near the VIP seats were people who had been invested by Celine. Already seeing Celine's face, they looked dazed, as if they had never thought she would be the Investor A. There were people who forgot the time and place and pointed fingers at her. She was sure they were talking that they couldn't believe because she was a wicked woman of gossip. Celine continued with the pleasant sight in her eyes. I'm happy to invest in such a meaningful business. I would like to express my gratitude to the Crown Prince for reaching out his hand first. Celine bowed her head again and thanked Asher, who stared at her from a little distance. Looking at her back, Asher, who had arranged his complicated feelings, touched his heart and offered her the utmost respect. The natural response made viewers wonder if they were on the same side. At first, I thought about it a lot, but I also decided to invest because I wanted to help the weak. If there's any business that could help anyone in the future, I'd like to actively review it. However, he soon smiled at Celine, who drew the line, citing other reasons than the Crown Prince. I hope to find a number of talented people through this academy, and I will be very supportive. Celine, smiling brightly, was not a wicked woman of gossip, but an angel who came down to the empire. The beautiful sight of it, which seemed to really save the weak, captivated the foolish people. When Celine, who enjoyed the gaze for such a moment, said goodbye again with a feathery, light gesture, and the sound of applause poured into the hall, where the silence had been for a moment. Celine, who received awe and respect on one body, glanced and identified Asher. He was watching Celine with a complicated look, who instantly changed her image by putting on a credible showmanship at an important moment. Chapter 150. Celine. As soon as Celine came down from the podium, the Countess, who rose from her seat, came up to her with a puff. If she waited a little while, she would go back to her place, but she couldn't bear it, and it was a quick step. It was still a face that did not understand what had happened to Celine. What the hell is this? Mother. Celine, who quickly grabbed her hand trying to raise her voice even though the ceremony was not yet over, smiled softly and hurried back to her seat. I'll sit down and explain. When she returned to her seat with the Countess, she saw Corinne and Vincent, who had become more contemplative. They gave Celine an immediate look, asking for an explanation. Why don't you enjoy the ceremony first? I think the VIP seat is getting more attention than the podium. As Celine said, the audience's eyes were on Celine rather than the host on the podium explaining the next sequence. The Crown Prince, who they dared not to even face him, was at the back seat. It must have been a shock that the Empire's star-studded investor was the wicked woman of the rumor. If she continued the conversation as it was, it would be rumored in public. You'll have to explain it properly when the ceremony is over. The Countess said, looking askance at her. Of course. Of course, it was necessary to explain it, as she would get busy in earnest. In the following ceremony, they were calling out a list of students who had already been selected for admission or those who had been selected for the scholarship. After it, she turned to the place where Asher was. He was also coming down the stage after the opening ceremony was over. What shall Asher say? She wondered if he was angry about why she cheated. Will he be surprised by the fact that I am the very investor, eh? Or is he pretending not to know? It's not like running straight this way. Whenever he took a step forward, her heart was pounding and various thoughts were covered in her head, and his aide, who was waiting under the platform, whispered something quietly to him so that others couldn't hear. As if it were a serious story, Asher soon nodded and left the hall with him. Did something happen? She was worried, but she couldn't see him until the ceremony was over. The scandal of the century. Contrary to Celine's efforts to avoid eye contact by stopping the conversation, their eyes towards her did not scatter until the ceremony was over. You'd better go outside. The Marquis of Vincent said, wrapping Corinne's shoulders to protect her. They didn't stick to her or asked if she was really the investor A, but they were constantly observing to examine her between rumors and reality. Is that beautiful lady the wicked woman of rumors? She's so different from the rumors. Furthermore, I can't believe that the wicked woman is the investor that has contributed to the business of the academy, so she's not going to invest in the business that can't guarantee profits unless she is an angel. Are all the rumors ever so far the slanders? Come to think of it, where did the rumors come from? They corrected the rumors, and she savored the voices that raised doubts and took her light steps. The crowd, who were greatly shocked, steadily caught up with a deep meaning that was contained in each step. We'd better get out of here quickly. The Countess took a quick step, conscious of her surroundings. She felt like she was going to die under the eyes of people before she could question her daughter about the enormous results she had made. Corinne and Marquis Vincent also carefully asked if they could visit the Count's mansion if they were willing to split the time and listen to Celine's explanation. I thought I'd have a conversation with Asher after the ceremony. She couldn't do that, as he had disappeared without a word of greeting. It was then that she was going to answer, of course, that they could do so. I'm sorry, but Lady Celine has a previous engagement with me. Oh my gosh. He, who had disappeared, appeared again from behind. I think I mentioned it in the letter. Isn't it? He urged Celine to spare her time. The Countess dropped the fan and swallowed her breath. I did. Certainly, in the letters exchanged with Pinocchio Louis, he had mentioned seeing her at the completion ceremony. So when she answered, he held out his hand as if he were going to escort her. The Countess, in his polite appearance, made a fuss and urged Celine, "Oh, come on. What are you doing? The explanation won't be too late to come back later, so keep your promise first." "Thank you, ma'am." When she was told that the Crown Prince, the noblest status in the empire, was grateful to her, she turned pale enough that it wouldn't be strange if she collapsed right away. Jessica hastened to support the Countess. "I'm sorry, Corinne." "No. Of course, you should make a prior engagement first. Please contact me when you have time. I'll be waiting. Letters are fine." Who could stop a previous engagement with the Crown Prince? Not surprisingly, Corinne also nodded and promised to do the following, and the Marquis of Vincent, who had acquaintance with Asher, added a little concern. "Lady is still a minor, so maybe it's better for a guardian to be with her." "Thank you for your concern, but you don't have to worry about it because we've met alone several times already." Asher, who was uncomfortable with it, responded curtly and urged Celine to hold his hand. His remarks could have prevented her from getting married, but instead of feeling bad, she had a smile on her face. So without making any excuses in the freezing atmosphere, as if to throw cold water with the shocking remarks of Asher, Celine disappeared smoothly holding his hand, past the crowds who gathered. Oh, my God, my daughter was involved with the Crown Prince. How envious she was of Lyra's entanglements with the Duke family. She thought she would have no other regret in her life if she would become the Marquise, but it turned out she had a meeting with the Crown Prince. She felt like she was telling someone else's story, not her daughter, who was always berated for being vulgar. That was not only the Countess but also all who had not known Celine's identity before. There were also audiences who heard nonsense near them. If that's really true, is it the scandal of the century? Even Annie, who knew that Celine was the investor A, didn't know Asher's identity, so she followed traces of Celine that had disappeared with her reddish face. Asher took Celine to a small cottage in the forest where she had visited the previous time. No matter how much he tried to avoid people's eyes, she was a little nervous because he led her to a dark and gloomy place, but when she turned the corner of a building, the forest appeared immediately. Celine, who had swallowed admiration for being so strange after several experiences, was seated on the table in the mansion garden, with Asher's escort. Huh? When she sat down, Celine wondered, and he asked her why. I feel like the chair and table have changed. She remembered that the chair and table she had seen before were a little old and rugged, a little ordinary for the nobleman to use. But now Celine's chair was very soft and comfortable, and the workmanship was beautiful, and the table was so luxurious that it could be brought to the table as an ornament. As she said, sweeping it with her hand, Asher replied casually. Oh, I changed it because it didn't seem right for you. Did you change it because of me? I only visited just one time. As she asked and blinked her eyes, he replied as if it was natural. Yes, you visit again like this, and I don't know how many times you'll be here. He smiled softly, expressing his desire to meet her before Celine's consent. Of course, she wouldn't refuse when he asked her agreement, but she laughed a little, and he said something with a serious face that had happened today. You hid your identity. When she had a little time to spare, the sudden, direct question that came in brought a quick, cold air in the woods, a coldness that might have made him hiccup if it hadn't been for the butler who brought the tea late. While he did not whip her with harsh words, Celine, who was afflicted in her mind, replied, avoiding his eyes. Chapter 151. I just didn't feel it was necessary. You didn't ask me if I was an investor. She knew it was not an excuse, but she couldn't stop saying it otherwise. She knew he was going to blame her for what she said. He would have felt frustrated and betrayed just as Asher had hidden his identity. So don't you mind if I ask you everything I want? However, Asher asked her as if to confirm, instead of being angry or digging into what she had said. Celine nodded, a little embarrassed, not knowing he was paying attention to each question. She wondered what he was asking and wondered why he was asking for permission, and as she waited for Asher, who was straining and swallowing, to ask, what Asher asked Celine was unexpected. How have you been? Yes? I think it's been a while, and when I found out that you were investor A, I was afraid that you were also as busy as I was. How can I compare myself to you, the Crown Prince, even if I am an investor with dozens of entrepreneurs? No, I was only reading and answering letters at the mansion. More than that. She was worried about Asher, whether he had heard of Princess Julia, or if he had heard she was now marrying a king of another country and gathering the aristocratic party again. I was worried about you. So, she said with a heartfelt expression, and he had a kindness on his face, and he seemed glad that Celine had been worried about him. I feel like I'm going to have a hard time, as you've worried about me. I'll be worried about you, and you don't have to think about it. Celine was a little angry at the answer, not knowing whether it was a joke or a serious answer, and Asher closed his eyes and laughed. It was the first time for him to smile so brightly that Celine stared at him for a long time, not knowing that her cheeks were blushing. I'm not as weak as you think I am. No, the Crown Prince, she remembered, was a weak man who had been swayed by the aristocratic party and could not even give his name. She didn't understand why he could now spread his wings like this. As he read the anxiety and worries in Celine's eyes, he gave an explanation to gain her trust. Of course, there's nothing I can say about looking weak. In fact, I never thought I'd get the upper hand from the aristocratic party so soon. I thought it was a long-term game. If necessary. I was thinking of marrying the princess. I was desperate because I didn't see a single hole to get out. As he brought up the story of his marriage to the princess, Celine's face darkened. As if to reassure her, Asher held the hand of Celine, who held the mug tightly. When the warmth of Asher reached her hand, which had cooled down a little bit, she felt that her anxiety was gone. But perhaps since I met you. He continued with a small smile as if he were recalling the day when he had first met Celine. The memory of being so embarrassed was few. Ever since I was a kid, I've always been obsessed with the idea of planning thoroughly and completely, but it all became useless when I met you. You're talking about the casino case. It was the connection that had begun with the word to sell the auction ticket to the owner of the general store. It was the connection that was possible because of knowing the future, which had never been possible in the past. Yes, I've been working on it for a long time, but it was going to be wrong. Since then, I've confirmed that the rumor has spread, as you said, and I found out that it wasn't, so I've been looking into you. There had been a misunderstanding between her and Lyra, and Celine had also mistaken him for his identity. The more I knew you, the more mysterious you become. I had a chance that I didn't expect from your wise advice. It had been part of Celine's perception. But the work of the princess had been different. Although not officially confirmed, they had been talking about marriage for years. But she would suddenly marry the king of another country. But the princess. I know what you're worried about. But I want you to trust me a little more. I'm a person who never misses an opportunity if it comes to me. He did not bring up all his words, but the gentle look of Asher was certain that there was a solution. May I visit the mansion of the Count in the near future? Last time you came without permission. So, she thought he would like to move the space as he did last time, but at the words that followed, she immediately knew that it was not. I'd like to give them a formal greeting and ask them their permission. Formal greeting. And permission for what? Will it be okay for me to like you in the future? Thud. Her heart began to pound as if something heavy had fallen over her chest. She had thought he might have feelings more than like, for herself, but when she heard it through his mouth, she was almost breathless. I've done that many times before, but I don't know if I'll meet you at the ceremony today, so all I can give is a tulip. As if it had already been set up, a beautiful bunch of tulips was in the hands of the butler, who had appeared, and Asher handed it and went down politely to one knee in front of Celine. Can I ask for a formal date? There was no worry or anxiousness in his eyes, which he asked with a bouquet of flowers. There was a conviction that Celine would receive his bouquet. He was really a man who didn't miss a chance. Then I want to receive it in a place that is a little bit more brilliant and magnificent next time. There's only once in a lifetime. So, as expected, she received the bouquet of flowers and said while Asher smiled brightly with a big smile. I will do it for you even if I use all of the Empire's resources. The Countess, who returned first to the mansion of the Count, did not hear a detailed explanation, but she summed up the situation and the dialogue at that time to draw her own conclusion. The investor A who has been complimented so much in public was Celine, and she continued to meet the Crown Prince for a long time, and even the Princess, who has become famous as the fiancée of the Crown Prince, would be married to the king of another country. Perhaps it was a very reasonable conclusion that the Crown Prince had kicked out the princess to make Celine his wife, who had an emerging power on her back. It was a very sound conclusion. Oh my God. After sorting out, a shrill scream on her chest was flowing out. Celine was so beautiful, and the Countess thought she could find a good mate, but she had never thought it would be a member of the imperial family. She had only a small thought to benefit her daughter by sending her to a good marriage, but she felt highly flattered by the fact that it was the noblest royal family in the empire that was unparalleled to any family. Her astonishment continued even after the carriage arrived at the mansion. You've been to the completion ceremony quite quickly, which my father was very uncomfortable with. Lyra, who was about to go out or come down to the first floor, dressed nicely to greet the Countess. Her personality suddenly changed after Alicia's death, and she blamed the Countess's behavior, showing signs of discomfort. She seemed to have found her true self, abandoning all her hard-working acts of kindness. It was true that she knew the Count would hate it, but she had forced herself to go out of the mansion, so she would have laughed if she had been normal, but not now. Lyra didn't even know what had been revealed at the ceremony. The Countess replied with a pleasant smile. Lyra, I wish you had been there with me. There's been a great thing. Although she was very willing to scold her, the Countess, who had a friendly smile that was like a mother's, answered in a slightly excited voice. A good thing had happened, and there was no need to rush recklessly. Chapter 152. Really? That's very interesting. I'm going out for business. Lyra took a breath and left the mansion, looking totally uninteresting. As soon as the detestable figure disappeared, Annie, who was following the Countess, gritted her teeth. Then she'll find out later and drop a fork or a cup of tea. Because she had witnessed it several times while serving Celine, even the modest Jessica hurriedly covered her mouth and held back her laughter. The Countess, who grasped Annie's character with her sharp eyes, patted her hair. I think it's time to make use of your specialty. My specialty? Yes, I'm sure they're all curious about what happened today. Aha! Only then did Annie's eyes shine when she realized what the Countess meant. It was time to make the proud appearance of her master, who had been hidden. Already, it would have been told through the mouths of thousands of people outside. So why not let the mansion know that? In order to give the right treatment to Celine, who would return soon. The excited Annie hurried around the mansion. Everyone. Something great happened. Don't regret it later, let's get together quickly. What's the big deal? She was always the one who had brought new and interesting news, so the servants and maids, who were working all over the mansion, held out their heads, asking, "What's that?" Where will the Count, Darian, and Lyra, who went out, hear the news for Celine? Wherever it was, it must be a very interesting and enjoyable reaction that she had never seen before. The Countess disappeared into her room, humming and thinking that she might be called the mother of the crown princess, who had risen from a prostitute to a countess. Lyra's carriage, heading for the mansion of the Duke, stopped in front of a famous bakery. It was to find a cake that she had reserved in advance. In order to take a freshly baked cake, she had to make a reservation ahead of time. While her maid went looking for it, she removed the curtains covering the window and looked outside. There's a lot of people today. Nearby, the Academy's completion ceremony had been held, and the ceremony seemed to have ended, and the attendees were out. This was the only way down because it was the imperial castle if they went up. So why did the Countess, who went out with Celine, come back alone? At that time, while she was questioning what was happening, they were surprised and stopped in front of the carriage of Lyra. Normally, if they found a noble's carriage, they should avoid it a little or bend their heads. Strangely enough, more and more people stared at the wagon or approached and snooped. What's going on? At Lyra's question, the knight, who had been waiting, went out of the carriage to check. When she glanced out of the window, Lyra opened her eyes wide to see people who had been rude and could not hide their happy faces, let alone avoid the appearance of the knight. People said something eagerly to the knight with their full excited faces, and the knight cocked his head and talked to them for a long time. What the hell is that? She was curious about the strange situation. It was a matter that would end when he gave attention and make them scatter, but why was he taking so long? The conversation, which continued until her maid with the cake appeared, ended when the joy gradually faded from the faces of the common people who had gathered there, and only after they had dispersed. To the knight, who returned with a look of embarrassment, Lyra asked what the reason was. That's. But the knight could not easily answer Lyra's question. The maid, who noticed from his side, intercepted the answer. As the conversation between the knight and the common people did not end until the cake was brought out, she had grasped the content. Her face was lit up as if she had received a birthday present. She was in a state of great excitement. I'll tell you. You know the famous investor in public, right? The investor has continued to invest in young and capable businessmen, regardless of their status. Investor A? Yes, yes. Well, Investor A showed up at the Academy's completion ceremony today. The hair of the maid, who nodded and answered brightly, sparkled the hairpin she had received from Celine. Oh, I'm sure they're the ones who were there. So what does this have to do with it now? The important part was not told, so Lyra cocked her head and asked. The face of the knight darkened and the maid swallowed and raised her voice. Surprisingly, I heard that Investor A was Miss Celine. That's why people gathered around the wagon with the family seal on it. They wondered if Miss Celine was riding it. What? Lyra was as hard as stone when the maid answered with pride. Lyra stared at her maid without moving as if she had forgotten how to breathe. She looked as if she was saying such nonsense. Is the daughter of that vulgar prostitute the rumored Investor A? She is the one who the princess wanted to take on her side. Does this make sense? What the hell am I hearing? It was unbelievable, but it was a shock, so Lyra's eyes opened a little bit wider, and she gave strength to her hands that were neatly placed on her legs. She was a dumb woman with nothing but her face. But she was a great investor. She had not known who it was, but she mentioned that Investor A was a very discerning and intelligent person in front of the princess in the past, and she recalled it. Her inquiring voice trembled weakly. Is that true? Is that really what they said? Didn't they make a mistake? That's what they said. They mentioned Vermont Celine, who was rumored to be a wicked woman. It's true, said the maid, but Lyra could not believe her maid's repeated answer and stared at the knight and urged him to answer. Please say no. I wish you would call it a foolish maid's delusion. Contrary to Lyra's expectations, however, the knight threw an answer to Lyra's question by avoiding her gaze quietly. How could that be so ridiculous? The pale-faced Lyra was lost in her thoughts for a moment. She then ran out of the carriage. It was a rough move that no noblewoman could ever think of. The knight called her from behind and hurried after her. In case someone, who had not yet left, ran around the carriage, mistaking her as Celine. There was an urgent document in his hand to show Celine. "Oh, I'm sorry." Soon, however, he realized that all but her hair and eyes were different and hurried to bow down to the noblewoman. Unlike Celine, who invested generously in the common people, ordinary aristocrats considered them insignificant. "The investor is a Vermont family? Is that why you're waiting?" When the pale-faced Lyra asked like that, the man with his head down answered carefully. "Yes." "Oh, yes," she said. Her name was Vermont Celine. What was the color of her hair? What was the color of her eyes? How tall was she? How was her skin color? How was her tone? How old was she? The man, embarrassed for a moment by the incessant flood of questions, soon began to answer the questions one after the other. A brilliantly shiny blonde, beautiful appearance, and green eyes that seemed to contain jewels. They were all just like Celine's appearance, and when Lyra lost her balance, the knight hurriedly supported her. Let's go quickly to the mansion of the Duke." As the knight assisted her to stand up and helped her walk back to the carriage, the people gathered around her to check what was going on, but there was no sound in Lyra's ear, perhaps because of the shock. Does the princess know this? What if she knows? Isn't it going to spark me? Don't tell me she's thinking of joining hands with the daughter of that vulgar prostitute. Lyra, who grasped her heart in order to stop it from beating so fast, raised her voice by asking the driver to go to the mansion of the Duke as soon as possible, and the wagon that ran as fast as it could rattled and headed to its destination. The princess, who was talking to a guest, greeted the visiting Lyra with pleasure as if she had not yet heard the public gossip. "Oh my God, you don't look good, Lady Lyra. What's going on?" "That's..." Lyra could not answer, looking at Vika, who was following after Julia out of the lounge. Vika, who knew he was a hindrance, said goodbye with an unexpected smile. Chapter 153. "Miss Julia, my business here is done, so I'll go now." "Thank you for your advice, Vika." Lyra, who was left with only the princess, shuddered as she could not bring up the story of Celine. It was even more difficult to talk about it as Oscar also came down after hearing her visit. But because she could not keep her mouth shut for long, Lyra soon closed her eyes and announced the sad news. In today's ceremony, Investor A showed up. "Oh my God, is that true? That's an interesting story. Is the person behind Investor A really that unexpected? You are trembling so much." Julia squinted at the unusual response, and Oscar frowned. "Who in the world?" Lyra, who took a sip of tea with her trembling hands, could not delay her news any longer and said in a very small voice. That's the woman." "The woman?" The calling was replaced by Julia because she hadn't even wanted to call Celine's name. "Did you just say, the woman? That's a lot of mischiefs." When Julia asked again with a smile on her face, Lyra closed her eyes and replied yes. "It's true." As she did earlier, Julia was also hardwired. Julia, who had been so hardened for a long time due to a lot of nonsense, called in her own servant to find out the truth. "Make sure it's real right now." Oscar, who couldn't figure out alone who they were referring to, asked many times, but no one answered. So there was still silence, and no conversation went on. The servant who had gone to look for information about Investor A, following Julia's instructions, came back quickly. "Miss Julia." Investor A identified herself as Vermont Celine. Clink. Julia threw her own teacup before the servant's report was over. Lyra was shocked and her body trembled, and when he noticed the identity of the woman, Oscar was shocked and covered his mouth with his palm. "Yeah, it was not unusual to talk back to me as I first met her." When she said so, Julia laughed loudly as if it was ridiculous. She added that she now knew why Investor A had refused firmly when she sent letters and people to Investor A several times. If she had done so sincerely, anyone would have met her at least once. Then, beside her, the servant, who had not finished his report yet, bit his lips and was restless. "I should have gotten rid of that wicked woman right away. She gritted her teeth, and her voice had a murderous spirit. If Celine was in front of her now, her murderous spirit would twist Celine's slender neck right away. As she cursed for a long time, Julia shone as if a good idea came to mind. Anyway, it was the force I was trying to get rid of because I couldn't pull it to my side, and even now. Everything would be done if she eliminated those who had received the investment, and she could not attract even Celine, who was annoying. No matter how great she was only the daughter of a prostitute. If she hired a killer, she could get rid of her without that much difficulty. Julia, who wanted to be alone, ordered the servant to head out, and he shook his head and said something he could not finish. Well, miss, I have one more thing to report. Julia sensed a tremendous fear from what the lingering servant was about to say. She was more scared now than when he reported that Celine was investor A. Is it something worse than what you said earlier? Insulted by the crown prince, she had to bow her head to those who had followed her. To make up for it, she even joined hands with the king of another country. It was a shame that she, who was a noble since birth and had royal blood, could not express her feelings with words. So there was nothing more shocking than that. For some reason, her heart that was beating really fast seemed to want to get out of her mouth, but she pretended to be casual and urged him to report. Then the servant, who took his time for a while, closed his eyes and continued to speak slowly. After the ceremony, with the crown prince, she's gone. She spoke as if she had been meeting him for a long time. What? It is rumored that Lady Celine of the Vermont family seems to have a close connection with the crown prince, His Highness. So all this insult and shame happened because of that vulgar bitch. Flop. Dear princess. Sister. Even before the servant's words ended, Julia, who was distracted by anger and shock, fell to the cold floor. Celine. After spending some time with Asher, walking in the woods, or visiting a villa, the count, who was supposed to return late at night, welcomed Celine. His face, facial expressions, and eyes reminded her of why he had returned home quickly. You came back quickly. I was back in a hurry after work. Friendlier than ever before, the count smiled brightly and looked at her with affection and a loving face, and he asked Celine to have tea with him after a long time. For a long time? Isn't this the first time? He would like to ask all his questions here, but he seemed to be trying to act nobly while drinking tea. Darian was behind the count and had a broken face. He looked as if he had lost a country. Why does he look like he lost something even though he had nothing to lose from the beginning? Do I need to curry favor with them and to be bothered at a time when I am supposed to be formally dating the crown prince? As the count had decided to take the side of the princess, he was close to the enemy wearing the leather of a family. As Celine delayed the answer, agonizing over how to make a profit, the count prompted her to move on quickly. Honey, Celine must be tired. She's been out since morning and now she just came back. It was none other than the countess who saved Celine from the count. Unlike usual, she raised her beautiful face and rebuked the count as she descended from the second floor. So shouldn't you be considerate? She was utterly complaining whether she was going to shake off all the humiliation she had ever gone through. This time, the count began to notice her complexion. I suppose so. I think you'd better rest, and let's talk tomorrow morning instead. Celine, who smiled brightly at the count who changed his words in an instant, was about to say that she would go up first, but Lyra, who had gone out to the mansion of the Duke, returned home with red, bloodshot eyes. Celine was convinced that it had something to do with her. Celine greeted and welcomed her. Welcome home, Lyra. She stepped back in amazement since she didn't think she would face Celine as soon as she returned to the mansion. Her eyes wandered around and shook. Oh, my God, it's so funny. It was very pleasant and fun, so she cleared her mind. She straightened her back and went straight back to her room. I should have reported it first. It's too late. I'm sorry to hide it in the meantime. As soon as she said that, eyes gathered in a flash. It was the expectation, frustration, and anger of Celine to announce what everyone already knew. She was Investor A key figure in the Empire's new power. Celine, who looked at everyone, taking all their eyes on her whole body, as if enjoying it, opened her mouth laughing as if she was very happy. And the person who was dating me said he wanted to visit the mansion soon. He wanted to ask permission, but I don't know what kind of permission it is, and I would know it in detail until that day. But Celine, who had thrown a bomb that was unexpected for everyone, climbed up the stairs and went back to her room, leaving them confused, shocked, and embarrassed. In the hall where she left, there was stillness and silence as if there were no people. Mississippi. You have to go down to the dining room. The next day, Jessica spoke to Celine in a worried voice. Celine was writing a letter while drinking a simple tea without eating anything even though it was already time for breakfast. I'm a little tired today. I'm not feeling well, so I'll skip breakfast. However, Celine smiled and shook her head, betraying the expectations of the people of the mansion of the Count who waited only for breakfast. In fact, she was actually feeling well. She was just saying that she was sick in order to worry them. Chapter 154. It wasn't because there was a plan. It was just fun. Why should I go ahead and give them pleasure? That was not necessary. Jessica, deliver this letter to Corinne. And bring a snack to the room. Celine wrote a letter describing her situation to Corinne. She sealed it finally and handed it to Jessica. You just said you weren't feeling well. Annie said that she would bring Celine's meal instead of the puzzled Jessica. She spent a leisurely morning relaxing with light soups and drinks and organizing her plans for the future. Looking out, she saw some young men who seemed to be wrestling with guards in front of the mansion gate. Lady Celine. Just a moment. Celine didn't hear what he was saying because he was too far, but she thought that it might have something to do with himself after the completion ceremony. So Celine sent Annie to find out about the disturbance, and it was as she had guessed. He's making a fuss about showing his business plan to you. Really? They say he doesn't listen to them even if they ask him to go back. He wants to see you at least once. Even if I ask him to deliver the plan to Baron Bourbon, he doesn't listen. How rude. That was understandable because it was rare to invest in a commoner with no foundation. In addition, there was a widespread rumor that Investor A's investment projects had all hit the jackpot. Moreover, she had invested in the academy like charity, and she had proudly declared that she would continue to invest, so anyone would want Celine to take a look at their business. Let him come in. Miss? It's my job to look at his business plan. I can't treat him badly since he had come this far. She had managed to find a way to freshen up her image, so she couldn't throw away anything regardless of how small it was. Now was the time to embrace the poor and make the wicked woman into a saint. I'm sure he's been walking since early in the morning, so he'd better take a simple meal with me. Tell the servants and maids to decorate the garden for a meal, enough to serve a guest. But miss. You don't know what kind of trouble you can get into if you just let anyone come in. That was true, but she had the hourglass to prepare for such things. Celine smiled softly as she glanced at the hourglass she had placed at the cabinet. Annie, do you think I'm stupid? It was only then that Annie swallowed her saliva when she recalled that Celine had already gone through a lot of frightening things. Recently, Celine clearly showed a benevolent, soft-faced look and went around as if she were a saint, but Annie, who was nearby, could tell that the wicked woman sometimes lurked inside of her just as the rumors said. So make sure it's not too late to prepare it. Yes, miss. With the help of Annie's quick actions, they quickly became ready to receive their guest in the garden. The Count, who had not been able to go out to hear the details from Celine, was puzzled and asked the servant why. I just heard that Lady Celine told Annie to prepare. Did Celine order it? The Count expressed his pride, misunderstanding that she had arranged the meeting place to explain the details to him. He didn't know that it was a big misunderstanding. My God, Lady Celine. Thank you very much. I would already be glad if you accept my business plan, but you also arranged a meal like this for me. You've come to me like this, and I can't refuse your admittance. I'm sure you've had a hard time, and I hope you enjoy your meal slowly. While you're eating, I'll go through your business plan. Thank you. In the soft and warm sunshine, nearly 10 young men began to eat in a hurry. Then the Count, the Countess, and Darian, who had misunderstood, came and saw it with a stunned face. Lyra, with a tender heart, watched the scene from the window and soon closed the window with a distorted face. The Count approached Celine, who reviewed the documents with a serious face and asked quietly. "Celine, don't you think that it would be enough if you have just received the documents? They've been waiting since morning, and I can't just send them back. I've been waiting for you since last night." The Count gave a bitter smile since he couldn't say what he really wanted to say. How did I end up in a position where I could not speak my mind to my stepdaughter? Having the merchant's temperament to the bone, he closed his mouth and sat in the dining table when he realized that he was not supposed to do so. "Didn't you eat inside already? I can't miss this place with the young businessmen. I'm curious because they will become the pillar of the empire in the future." The Count, who never thought so, wrapped up in plausible words, and Darian and the Countess followed him. They seemed very uncomfortable, but no one took it out of their mouths. "Do they have any good ideas?" Celine made a meaningful smile at the Count's question. What he wanted was to see them. But she could not. Unlike herself, who only cared about investing purely, the Count seemed to take the brilliant ideas of these young businessmen, so she replaced the answer with just a nod. "Okay, you've all brought a good plan." The faces of the young people, who were eating, became bright. The fact that they were recognized by Celine meant that they were excellent in doing business. They are fresh and unique. They are valuable projects. However, I still see things that need to be revised. Of course, it was empty talk. In retrospect, none of the business plans would succeed in the future. Furthermore, judging from the knowledge that they put in their projects, they were just common people, who were not fit for doing business. Even so, it was judged that if they had the ability to make such a neat analysis and organize a plan, they could help others. It was a great opportunity. "So I want to give you a chance." Celine suggested that they should study at the academy. The young people became disappointed upon hearing what Celine said. They felt rejected because of what Celine said. She served them lunch, but she couldn't just finish the meeting just like that, so Celine told them the following. "If you all didn't have any talent, I wouldn't recommend the academy to all of you and just sent you back, but you all are talented people, so I'll support you with your school expenses." She had been thinking that it would not be too bad to support a scholarship named after her anyway. It was also an offer from Asher, and it was so she could put on airs so she could look good. It was nothing more than a penny. The young people were thrilled to hear that she would even sponsor their tuition, along with praise for their talent, although they kind of got rejected. "Why don't you have a cup of tea and go back?" "No, I got a great favor from you, and I can't stay still." Celine, watching the vigorous disappearance of the young men, slowly hardened her face and laid down her fork and knife. The meal was excellent, but she had a bad appetite. It was due to the table manners of the young people. She felt like she knew how they had felt when they had been in the same situation, as she had had no table manners in the past. Thinking that the hindrance had finally disappeared, the Count spoke to Celine without missing the chance. "Celine, are the rumors true?" He had a very urgent look on his face. He deserved it, as he saw even the young people who came with business plans. They were not like noblemen, but hungry beasts that were wandering the streets. Rumors? She couldn't see the Count's face that much, and she pretended not to know it. He raised his voice as if he were frustrated and said, "The rumors that you're investor A and are close to the Crown Prince." He already saw the young people come and then go, but he still wanted to confirm. When she nodded and expressed a sign of affirmation, the Count smiled brightly and said, "That was cool." The Count did not confirm the rumors again because the Countess had already seen it in person, and he had already confirmed it through numerous mouths. "As expected, I've always known that you have the talent since you were young." Does he mean the fur business, which Lane misunderstood as Lyra's design? Chapter 155. However, the Count did not take any action to correct it otherwise. Even she had contributed much to the warehouse business, but the Count had not even mentioned what was going on with the business, let alone recognize herself. "I see. I thought you forgot because you didn't mention anything. That's why I moved independently." Celine replied with a smile mixed with laughter. She didn't have to be wary anymore, so she blamed him for his faults. So the Count felt a prick of conscience and cleared his throat, and turned the sensitive topic as if he had done nothing wrong in the past. Yes, yes. Now I know it. From now on, I think you should go outside with Darian. I've got a lot of work to do. He proudly demanded that she should help his business in the future. It was a natural tone for Celine to help him. No, it was a tone that he would make that way. No, I'm busy. There are young people who would come here like this, so I should welcome them. I can't leave my place because letters are coming from other countries. However, the Count's mouth closed as if it had been stitched up by her firm refusal. Certainly, it was because she seemed to look busy for anyone. Perhaps he realized that he had already missed the opportunity, and the Count's eyes wandered through the air. You've known the Crown Prince before, haven't you? Darian, who managed to find a gap, asked. His expression was quite serious. The Countess also waited with her eyes glistening for an answer, for she seemed curious. It's been 2 years since I was 14. It was a remarkable period even when she said so. It had been 2 years since that bad relationship. The Crown Prince, who was a boy, would become an adult at the age of 20, starting with this year's birthday. Starting with the coming-of-age ceremony, he would have an official appearance, and unlike in the past, he would exalt himself in the world. Can I be myself that would sit next to him? She smiled with an uncanny smile of anticipation and anxiety, but Darian accepted it strange and furrowed his forehead to the fullest extent. The Countess made a fuss, saying, "Why did you hide it all this time? I met him without knowing who he was. I only recently knew that he was the Crown Prince." Oh, my God. It's like a story in a novel. You've fallen in love without knowing each other. How could it be romantic? She was like a girl in admiration. She seemed happy since her daughter had achieved a dream she had never dreamed of. Don't tell me, is that the man you met before in court, the Crown Prince, not Mr. Pinonua? Oh, come to think of it, you've met him. That's right. Pinonua is, he said it's a name he borrowed for a while. Oh, did he come to court as he was worried about you, even if he was busy? He said yes. Is this the end of the question? I think it's better to hear more about it when Mr. Asher comes. If I tell you all, the conversation between us will disappear. Celine said that and returned to her room. In the warm sunlit garden, only 3 people left with different thoughts and hearts. It took less than 2 days that the rumors that she had served meals to the young men who had visited her covered the capital. The wicked woman of the rumor, no, Celine, now a beautiful investor of the rumors who had tried to raise her social status and understand the common people, smiled as she watched the young people gathered at the gate of the mansion today. Miss. I told them to come on a set date and time every week as you ordered. Jessica said with a bright face. I am an investor who talks to young entrepreneurs every week. What a beautiful thing it is. Good job. And I brought a newspaper, a little early. Hans brought it to the mansion himself. Really? Jessica's expression of taking out the newspaper was very bright. Celine sensed that her story was in the newspaper. What kind of praise are they giving me? She opened the newspaper with anticipation, and Jessica added. It looks like Hans has entered the academy you invested in. I heard that he got a scholarship. So I thought he was running out of time, so I said he'd bring newspapers to the mansion as he had a free time. Really? She felt strange when she heard a story she had never thought of because in the past he had faced a terrible end, but he found his own happiness now. And she expected that she would be able to face such a future like that, by getting rid of the real wicked woman. The wicked woman of the rumors was a saint. The article seemed to represent her heart, and Celine's mouth went up high in the sky. Jessica had a bright face as if she read it before handing it out. After it had turned out that she was the investor A of rumors, she had not won popularity. It was thanks to the 2 years of changing the very little things step by step. A group of young people who she had met at a meeting with Corinne, and the servants and maids of the mansion, or a group of people with her support for business were the examples. It was also thanks to the fact that she had sometimes attended the official meeting and revealed that she had a brilliant and beautiful appearance and elegant demeanor that was completely different from what was rumored. And playing the victim extensively in Emma's case had also played a part. All those little efforts that she'd made so far shone through this opportunity. I never thought I'd be so successful in business at first. The reason she had talked about business for the first time was to somehow win the Count's heart in revenge against Lyra. But then she had realized it was wrong and jumped on her own business to create her own power to survive Lyra and the princess. However, she had not even expected to be so successful like this. She hadn't even imagined it would make her happy to have such a relationship with someone. Compared to then and now, she felt as if she were someone else. It's finally going to turn out that the rumors about you have been malicious. Jessica didn't even remember what she had when Celine had first come into the mansion, but Jessica erased a hint of anxiety about her master and revealed her pure trust. If I could go back, I would like to go back to the time when I just came into the mansion. Then, she wouldn't have needed these annoying series of actions. She wouldn't have been mean to Jessica either. However, she had returned to the vague time when she had done something bad to Jessica, and she had repaid it back. Celine soon shook her head and took her regrets out of her mind, because she didn't even have enough time to maintain what she got. Celine turned to the newspaper again. No matter how cheap the newspaper the common people read was, the story would be delivered to the Count, Darien, and Lyra. Whether it was the case or not, the Count and Darien had silently committed to their work for some time, and they had returned home late and it was hard to see their faces. Still, Celine asked Jessica, suspecting that there must be another because he was a merchant who didn't miss what was in his interest. What about Lyra? She went out early. And for some purpose, Lyra had been busy going out lately, too. So, Celine narrowed her eyes. I wouldn't be able to carry my face if it were me. She is a brazen-faced girl. Although her reputation had been declining day by day, Lyra got up again and forced her to go out. The destination was, probably the mansion of the Duke, to meet the princess who had connected her with Oscar. Chapter 156. According to reports by the maids of the mansion, if there had been a big incident, Lyra had received a letter from the princess. And they also said that even before the incident, letters had often arrived. So she must have gone for advice again this time. And how angry and upset the princess would be because she would think I intercepted the crown prince. Before the crown prince, Celine had also had a scandal with Julia's lovely brother. Celine hadn't met her a few times, but she was sure Julia wanted to rip her to death because she had been involved in bad things. Now that Lyra is dependent on her, is the real enemy the princess? If she were to continue her meeting with the crown prince anyway, the princess would naturally be an enemy, but apart from that, she was bound by her personal grudge. Celine could not forget the hostile look at Lyra's birthday party. So she spent the day thinking about how to stop Julia from seeking new power by marrying the king of another country, and how to check it, but a guest visited her late in the evening. He was an unexpected guest, with a bunch of tulip flowers that didn't wither easily, and a gift box in his hand. Mr. Lane? I'm sorry if I'm late at night. I've been on a business trip to a faraway place, and I didn't have a free time to visit. His visit meant that she could hear the news of Asher. She was in a hurry to prepare tea, but unfortunately, the Count and Darien came home at that moment. The Count had to inform Darien of his work and deal with the accumulated work, so he looked very tired. It was also because of the rumors circulating between her two daughters. He had not cared about his stepdaughter when she had been a wicked woman, but how painful it must be for his own daughter to become a wicked woman. However, the rumors were all grounded and he did not take action otherwise. If there were no grounds for the rumors, he would have been around, saying, this was all Celine's work. That was why the Count did not like Lane, who had come to visit after a long time. It was also because there was nothing more to take from him. What brings you here so late? I remember you said that you wouldn't come anymore. Don't tell me, you came here because you were interested in Celine? The Count, who had tried to pass Celine on to Rain in the past, was now wondering if Lane would be interested in Celine. He didn't even know Celine snorting at his two-faced figure. Darien also glared at Lane with a face similar to his father's. They did not welcome him enough to make him uncomfortable, but Lane answered with a careless face, Ah. I wanted to, but I was wondering if the Count is doing well. My master asked me to say hello and he is very interested in the Count's business. Really? Well, then. When Lane even mentioned his master, who had helped the Count, he suggested that Rain eat with him, with his exhausted body, since he could no longer be uncomfortable. He seemed, of course, to think that Lane had come to see him. Lane looked a little uncomfortable, but soon nodded and headed to the dining room. The bouquets and gifts he had prepared were given to Celine at the instruction of Asher so that all his business was done. Why didn't Mr. Asher come by himself? He used to come to her room. As she was curious, she hurried up to her room and opened the letter. The present was a back seat. I'm sending you a letter through Lane because I'm in a difficult place to visit you. Through the first sentence, Celine realized it was not that he had not come but that he could not. Where in the world did he go so that he could not come? She read the letter in haste again, fearing that he might be wandering around strange places by hostile forces as before. It's not something you should worry about. The reason why I am sending this letter is because I couldn't contact you because I told you at the last meeting I'd visit you soon. I was thinking about when it would be good, and I thought it would be better to coordinate the timing with you. In the following letter was written as if he had spoken to her before her eyes, as if he had read and thought of her mind. Since then, it was written about the time that Asher wished to visit, and it was quite late at night. It also said that just in case she should vacate the room that day, so she put it in her head so that she wouldn't forget it. What is this? When she finished reading the letter, she looked at it for a while and opened the present she had left on the table, and there was a bracelet she had never seen. It was made up of a string of thin threads tied together. It was the first time she saw it. Is he out of the country? That was why she felt like he had sent her this amazing ornament. Wherever he was, she hoped he would come back in good health, and she reopened what she had to do. Look at this cookie. It's fresh in shape. Yes. It's cute. Young ladies, seated at a luxurious table in a colorful garden, each expressed exaggerated admiration. At the center of them was Lyra. It's a special one from the princess. It's as expected. She has a different eye. They tried to pretend to be calm, ignoring the bombs that fell in their territory. They were gathered to do so. As they were anxious and worried by themselves alone, they brainwashed each other as if the situation would be okay. Then, the wicked woman of rumors. You know, she's been running around like that, and well, she made the worst choice. She has the dirty blood and so she's been doing like that. She is a creature that must be parasitic, just like her mother. I'm worried about the future of the empire. And they gathered to attack the public enemy. I'm sure the princess is struggling to stop it. That's right. She'd rather join hands with another country than have dirty blood as the descendant of the empire. Finally, it was to praise the existence that they believed in and should follow. It was Lyra's job to unite the hearts of aristocratic ladies in this situation, where rumors about herself and their faith in the aristocratic party had become blurred. Unlike Celine, who had built her own power, what all other aristocratic ladies could do in the present situation was to gather and enjoy refreshments and gossip. I'll pass on your opinion to Julia. I'm sure she'll be happy. In fact, it was only their names she would actually tell, but Lyra, who spoke empty words as a representative, spent time with the young ladies in moderation before heading to the princess. It was Julia, who had become nervous after knowing that the crown prince was meeting with Celine. It was because of the shock that the daughter of a prostitute, who was no one else, would take her place. Even if she had been elevated to her status, who would give a new power to him? If I haven't been compared. Lyra was also shocked, but not as much as Julia. The princess had been compared to the dirty blood she had hated so much. There was even an opinion that, unlike when Lyra and Celine were compared, Celine of shallow birth was better than Julia, who succeeded the blood of the imperial family. It was those who were possessed by her frivolous appearance, and those who were possessed by her false character. Lyra reported what had happened in the meanwhile, as she tried not to offend the princess as much as she could. You don't have to worry about the young ladies. They are so loyal to you. If they had a betrayer, they'd throw themselves to stop her. Although it was not an important report that Julia wished for, she treated that it was a matter of great importance. That was why Julia answered with a cold face and asked something else. I see. Did His Highness ever visit the mansion? Yes. Oh, no. Not yet. Julia was obsessed with it to the point that she regretted if she made a report. Even after quite some time, the shadow of the Crown Prince was not visible. Chapter 157. Lyra opened her mouth to try to change the mood. Wouldn't the woman be lying? It may be a bluff. His Highness hasn't said anything yet. Maybe she's running around alone. But the more Lyra spoke, the worse Julia felt. It was because she knew it wasn't. There was a past in which she could guess. It was the engagement ceremony of the Marquis of Vincent. For Julia, who had secretly captured the situation in the garden, this situation did not appear to be false or pretentious. Didn't he even say he had no intention of marrying herself on the spot? As she could not show any more ugly looks, Julia hid her trembling hands under the table and said with a deep sigh. We have to do whatever we can to separate them, for the honor of the nobility. Yes, you're right. I'll figure out how to do it by myself, so please persuade the Count as much as you can. Now there was no Alicia to help her. Lyra nodded and expressed her sympathy, because what Julia said was quite natural. But she had already failed a few times, so what could she do now? Sensing the anxiety reflected on Lyra's face, Julia uttered a spell to cheer her up. You're not old enough yet, but there's always been an exception, so you'd better hurry up your engagement to Oscar, for the unity of the aristocratic party. Yes? His Highness is trying to take an unprecedented, humble woman to the imperial castle, and there's nothing you can't do about it. Since Oscar thinks so, you need to help. Is it real? Lyra's eyes were motivated by Julia's sly reply. If it were true, she'd be delighted, but even if it wasn't true, she knew Julia would make it that way. Don't worry, Lady Julia. I'll do whatever it takes to help Julia this time. At the unexpected reward, Lyra had a strong response. Celine's rumors spread smoothly. An inspiring story made as an important story again, and they praised her among themselves. Even it was a very easy thing to pick one or two young people to invest in a dinner at the mansion, and send them to the academy with scholarships. I heard Hans is that smart. It's gossipy, but he's been borrowing newspapers since he was very young, and he's known to be knowledgeable. And Jessica sometimes brought up Hans's story. It was also because they had met regularly for several years. In addition, their friendship seemed to have grown rapidly in recent years, with the media called Celine. Really? How old is Hans? He said he's going to be 20 this year. Jessica, he's the same age as you. Yes. That's why we talk the same language. Jessica's shy smile made Celine feel the true joy she'd never seen before. Celine, who had squinted her eyes and watched it, nodded with a face that she would know. I was going to give her a more capable person. She had thought someone much better than Annie's. Celine thought she deserved it. Hans, who had a large family, was likely to give Jessica a hard time. So she was drinking tea to relieve her disappointment, and suddenly she had a good idea. I can raise Hans, right? Hans had received a scholarship and even entered the academy in recognition of his ability even though she had not helped him at all. Though left alone, he had been victorious, so if she could support him, he must be successful. Yes, good. Tell Hans that I have a great expectation. Yes? Yes, Mississippi. Nor was she praised herself, but Celine's expression was profound and mysterious as she stared at Jessica with a broad smile. She wouldn't have known it in the past, but somehow she understood Jessica's mood. Well, I'll leave now. Don't overwork. Jessica, who had brought the new tea out, left Celine's room. After Jessica went out, it was time to lie down in bed if it were normal, but not today. Far from falling asleep, she had her eyes wide open. Because Lady Celine. Mr. Asher. Because it was the day that Asher visited. He seemed to have come as soon as the work was done. He appeared with his very tired face. Somehow, she felt a hot wind on his collar. Celine, who had been waiting for him, had a cup of tea and read a book, but welcomed him with astonishment. "My God. I think you have a little tan. I think it's because I've been to a hot place." Asher's eyes touched Celine's slender wrists. He caught sight of the bracelet he had given her last time. It was a seemingly normal-looking bracelet, but the meaning inside was unusual. There was a sense of satisfaction in his gentle smiling eyes. Celine had not noticed this and said that she would have liked to have drinks prepared, not tea. As soon as he saw that Celine had a bad look, he asked, squinting his eyes, "Do you feel bad because I'm here?" "No. No way." She had been looking forward to this day. She had been so busy every day, but she had felt that time seemed to run slowly. When she tried to pour hot tea, he shook his head and poured the tea into the teacup himself. "I can't have you do that, who is busy struggling." He also filled Celine's cup with tea. The crown prince, who would never have done anything like this, did that. Feeling burdened by the words, "Come on, sit down," she looked down at his hand, which seemed a little rougher, and she noticed him wearing the same ring as herself, though of different colors. When she had first seen it, she had thought it was a bit simple for a noblewoman to wear, but it seemed that he had intentionally chosen a simple design to wear it. That was why the discomfort of her heart melted away and the warm spring sun covered her heart. "The ring, the color is different, but it's the same as the ring that Mr. Asher gave me." "Oh, it's the same ring. The color has changed for a while now. After a while, the color will come back." "Will the color change?" For such a thing, it was very mysterious to have a subtle blue glow. When she looked at it wonderfully, he took the ring out of his finger and put it on the table. "Oh my gosh." Then, the color changed in a flash as if the ring had a blue color. "It's a ring that comes down to the imperial family. It changes color when I use it. The ring which I gave you is the same." Celine, surprised by this, opened her eyes and asked, "Then, is it like an imperial family heirloom?" "I can say it's similar. I inherited it from my father and mother." It was a ring with such a great meaning. She hadn't thought it meant much because it wasn't particularly colorful. Celine was very embarrassed. They looked down at the ring in her hand, which was shaking. "I don't know if I can take it." Asher, who stared at Celine, slowly reached out and took her hand with the ring. "The ring's owner is only you." Then he smiled softly, with his serious eyes, and replied with a very natural smile. "The owner of the ring? Although I have a date with him, it's a little shy of." Her cheeks under her eyes glowed for nothing. So far, she had heard that she was beautiful or they liked her, but no one had ever talked about the future with her seriously. Moreover, for her living in the past and the present, Asher had always given her the first experience. If she would consider her real age including past life, he was so young, but he thrilled her so much. After confessing the meaning of the ring, he swallowed and was apparently anxious because he had no answer from Celine. He looked nervous but quite different from his bold words. He seemed worried. What if Celine gives back the ring? It was difficult to gauge each other's minds as they were still in the beginning stage. Celine, who had been looking for an answer for a while, soon held the hand of Asher, who covered her hand. "I wonder if I deserve it, but, thank you." He was a little surprised and ashamed, but there was no refusal anyway. Now he couldn't imagine anyone standing next to him. When Celine answered so, Asher, whose ears were blushed, folded his eyes finely and added strength to his hands. "I'm just grateful." Chapter 158. When she held his hand still, exchanging such ticklish words, she was overcome with a sense of satisfaction, even though she didn't exchange special actions or words. That was why people wanted to meet someone and date. Celine learned about it well over 20 years later. And the new feeling changed Celine's future. It was changed from the shady future that was dotted with only darkness to the one in which light existed and was rather challenging. Celine, who had been so happy for a while, checked the time that had already passed and hurriedly said something she had prepared. "Do you remember Lady Corinne, a daughter of the family of Viscount Lauren, who will be a wife of the Marquis?" "Oh, of course, I remember." I don't know if she'll have time. I would like to ask Lady Corinne to teach students at the academy. What do you think? I thought it would be better to learn manners since everyone is a commoner. Celine added that Corinne used to be her tutor and that she felt rewarding in teaching children and wanted to become a teacher later on. Realizing that she didn't just say that Corinne's dream was to be a teacher, Asher erased his tender smile and took out the crown prince's face. If that happens, the people in the middle will be quite agitated. I'm sure so. Because there were a series of incidents lately. Celine, who had said that far, was wary of Asher. She thought he would already know about the princess, but just in case. Then he answered, I know what happened recently, and continued with confidence. I'm sure there will be some nobles who will change their stance to support me because Marquis Vincent and Lady Corinne declared their support for me. Celine also came back to the face of the investor and explained what he could get. It was possible because the two were helping each other to change their future, not just a relationship that led to a love affair between a man and a woman. After talking for so long, Asher suddenly asked a question as he was preparing to go back late at night. Oh, by the way, did you have any private talk with the judge in court? Then Celine shook her head and said, The judge? No. I don't even remember her name. I see. What happened? No, she was curious about you. She even asked me to set up a table to meet you, if it's okay. Me? Even her face was vague, but why? Doesn't she like me who meets Asher? Come to think of it, it occurred to her that the judge had checked her face in court and hesitated. So when she furrowed her forehead because she could only think of negative thoughts, Asher tried to reassure and kissed Celine on the back of her hand. But she's already deployed far away from power. She's also a woman who's not married. She can't get involved with me. She's probably curious because the rumors are great. I'm glad to hear that. Nevertheless, there were fears that she might not know. Once again, Asher set Celine at ease, and said that he would make a formal visit next week. I'll send a letter to the mansion. Then Celine smiled as she tried to touch the back of her hand for a while when he had disappeared like a ghost. Then, a few days later, the mansion was disturbed by a letter stamped with the imperial seal. Of all occasions, it arrived early in the morning, and the count delayed even going out, and the countess blushed like a girl. Oh, my God, His Highness will visit this mansion. The countess, who raised her voice, said, I have to hurry up and decorate the mansion, and she pushed the servants and maids. Wipe clean without dust. I'm going to have to replace all the curtains and the carpet. The most luxurious one. I have to do the gardening, and... The countess's orders fell incessantly. She acted as if she were building a new mansion. The servants and maids could be annoying, but it was for Celine and they were all eager to do their best. This was also because it had been accomplished by her step by step. When she tried to dissuade the countess, who said, I have to prepare the new dress, Lyra called Celine, with a cold look. Why did you call me? Celine guessed why she called her, but asked, pretending not to know it. And Lyra's eyes sank coldly. Her spitting words had piercing thorns. They were sharp thorns only directed at Celine. Do you really think you're going to be the wife of the crown prince? Her face had an expression, how dare you? Celine gave her a relaxed look and said, well, maybe I'll suit better than the princess who holds hands with a foreign country and sells her country. At the level, Celine dealt with her, and Lyra shuddered and said, how can you say such vulgar things? It's true, isn't it? She's rallying all the nobles and acting like she's going to commit treason. Don't tell me, she's doing such a thing since she lost a man. Even the common people don't do that. Don't insult the princess. Suddenly, Lyra shouted for a moment, and all eyes were directed to her. Celine couldn't believe Lyra got angry after she provoked a quarrel first. Unlike Celine, who managed her facial expression flexibly, Lyra's expression was appalling. It's ugly. It was unimaginable. In the past, it had been all the opposite. Celine, feeling better, dropped her eyebrows as if she was surprised, and with a sad look, whispered to Lyra in silence. What if it's true? And you'd better also know that nothing changes when you're so angry. Now you don't have anyone to sacrifice like Alicia, do you? Don't tell me you're going to grab my hair. I hope you do it. Expecting it, Celine smiled with a victorious smile, and Lyra, who was shaking her whole body, clenched her teeth. It was truly admirable self-control. As expected, you're also the daughter of a foolish prostitute. Things don't work that easily, but you can't even figure out who you are. The blood of vulgarity deserves to remain shallow forever. Then Lyra turned and disappeared upstairs. Celine, embarrassed by the fact that she didn't know Lyra would make such a shocking remark, stopped for a moment with a dazed face, then let out a feigned smile. It was a vulgar expression that suited her very well. The imperial carriage carrying the crown prince headed for the mansion of the Count Virmont. Wagons that were decorated with brilliant gold were not one, but two. One was carrying Asher, and the other was carrying gold and silver coins prepared as gifts. Oh, my God, what's that? The carriages passed through the busy streets, so many people witnessed the scene. Most of the royal family's actions were secret unless it was an official event, so those who witnessed the unexpected outing opened their eyes and created speculation and rumors. Don't tell me, His Highness the Crown Prince is going to meet Virmont's Celine. Fact-based rumors quickly engulfed the capital as the carriages headed toward the mansion of Count Virmont. The scandal of the century drew everyone's attention. At that, a smile lifted the corner of the mouth of Asher, who examined the documents in the carriage. He looked very happy, unlike his usual, expressionless face, because he was on his way to see Celine. Of course, he could have visited as many times as he could without showing up like this, but he deliberately chose a fancy wagon with the imperial seal on it. The reason was simple. It was to spread more and more between himself and Celine. The reason why he had to make such a choice was because he wanted to show off. The great woman who was dealing with the empire was her lover. I'm pleased to see Your Highness the Crown Prince. The carriages arrived at the mansion of Count Virmont across the capital, with all eyes on them. As soon as the carriages stopped, the Count and Countess said, giving a full courtesy. As of yet, Asher didn't even get off the wagon, but they looked very nervous. The servants and maids, who were waiting around the Countess, also bowed their heads. Lyra and Darian also took a polite attitude. Among them, Celine greeted him with her own back upright. It was her own privilege. Lady Celine. Asher, who got out of the carriage late, was wearing a fancy dress she had never seen before. The white suit had the number of gold on it and was dazzling, and his fine-tuned hair and graceful appearance were admired. Unlike his previous black suits, which had erased his presence, his appearance was clearly the crown prince. Chapter 159. If you had just dressed up like this, I would have recognized that you are the crown prince. Celine greeted him with a flush of redness as he was more attentive than the Academy's completion ceremony. Mr. Asher, you've had a hard time after coming a long way. I was just happy on my way to see you. Asher said in a friendly manner. They could only hear his voice, but they could feel how much he was for Celine. And the hardships must have been with the people in the mansion. What a benevolent person you are. The crown prince might be a little arrogant, but Asher said something he didn't want to say to the people around him. Many people have suffered as you said, so please look around the mansion decorated with all their heart. I'll do that. I'm looking forward to it. Will you guide me? Sure. Who else would do except me? In response, even Celine performed a pretentious performance, giving great emotion and joy to those who could only hear their voices. Mr. Asterope. As the two continued their futile talk in front of those who had bowed their heads, one of the closest aides of Asher finally winked at him by calling his name. This was because the conversation continued until all the presents on the wagon were dropped. The one who spoke was well acquainted with Celine. It was Sork, the knight whom she had met in the general store. Sork, whose eyes met Celine, paid a brief silent tribute to her. Oh, I'm sorry. You can all stand up. Only then did the people of the mansion, who raised their heads, identified the face of Asher. Unlike the secret rumors that he had shown only the weak aspects pushed by the aristocratic party, he was so bright and handsome, and they tried to swallow their reactions that were about to erupt. What on earth is that gold and silver coin? An unheard of gift of a wagon load of great gifts stole their attention. It was like a great gift in a fairy tale. This is my father and my mother. The Count and Countess, who were briefly fascinated by Celine's introduction, bowed down again. I heard you're good people. Especially, the Count was very good at business. Lady Celine may have inherited that brilliance. And the Countess, you're such a beauty. I thought the most beautiful woman in the empire was Celine, but there are actually two. Thank you for allowing me to visit this way. The tension disappeared a little from the Count and Countess's face as he complimented them by flattery as if he had oiled his mouth. They had been very worried because he was the crown prince, but he was so different. The Countess gazed ecstatically at him with a flushed face. And here, my brother Darian and sister Lyra. Darian and Lyra took their courtesy at the introduction of Celine, which followed. It wasn't a bright look, but it wasn't even a face to be pointed out. They looked nervous, but the crown prince could overlook it. As expected, they were nobles, who knew how to hide their true self. I see. Nevertheless, the response from Asher was cool. It was because he recognized Darian's face. He couldn't think of him as a good man who had shown his possessiveness to Celine in court. It was the dirty desire to possess her under the mask for her younger sister. Besides, next to him was Lyra of the rumor. The sister who had used dirty tricks to bring Celine to death, and she was also the frontman of the ugly Princess Julia. They should be affectionate, but they had a brusque face. Asher gave strength to his fists for a while, and unlike the friendliness he showed to the Count couple, he finished his greetings to Darian and Lyra with a quick glance. I am hungry. Maybe it's because I've been in a hurry since morning to meet you. How can you show them this satisfactory response? Celine smiled brightly at the words of Asher, and the Count and Countess's face was again in contemplation. They then made a fuss, saying, we should have moved to the dining area where we arranged in the garden before he mentioned it. Darian and Lyra, who couldn't complete the introduction properly and couldn't move due to stiffness, were laid aside. In the first place, he was in a position that was not strange enough to ignore them, and now the most important thing here was the hunger of Asher, so no one cared about it. I'm glad the weather is good. We've arranged a luncheon in the garden. As she took his hand and moved to the luncheon venue, she glanced behind and saw her sister and brother, who tried to hide their angry expressions. The crown prince has visited, and you won't be able to leave first. How uncomfortable is this seat? They, who despised Celine for her humble origin, were now swallowing their anger, unable to resist a higher status than they were. You reap what you sow. Celine, feeling better thanks to Asher, smiled brightly and gracefully. It was a more beautiful smile than a garden full of lilies. Then, Asher also smiled facing Celine, as if he felt better. The two looked like they had already fallen in love with each other even though they just started dating. The Countess, who was impressed by this, glared her eyes and looked at it. As soon as everyone sat down at the table, the meal began right away without delay. Whether they practiced all day and night, the movements of the attendants were so neat that they made no mistake. You must have cared about it. As he said, the elaborate dishes filled the tables one by one. They were coarse dishes that used the highest quality materials. It would be fine if it was dinner, but it was a little bit too much just for lunch. Since he had left all the work for the meal to the Countess, the Count noticed the fact now, and he had a sinking heart. He seemed to think it was irony. At the inappropriate response, the Count swallowed and was worried that the Crown Prince would not be angry. I am deeply flattered by your treatment as it is too much. But unlike the Count's worries, Asher was grateful for the meal rather than complaining about it, and he enjoyed it. The Count soon looked puzzled, and the Countess, who could not grasp the atmosphere, asked, blushing with delight, thinking that she had been praised for her work. I don't know if it will fit your taste. What are you talking about? It's delicious. Although it was not necessary to gain their favor, Asher expressed his feelings to the Count and Countess throughout the meal. He behaved as if he had the lowest position there. However, no matter how hostile he was as an opponent, as the Crown Prince, who would be the next emperor, he lowered himself and talked intimately. The Count became more excited, like a disciple who wanted to be praised by his teacher. I heard that you've had a hard time with the fur business. Yes. Taxes on luxury goods are too much. Oh, my. I could have helped you if I had known beforehand. I'm sorry about that. Thank you, those kind words are enough. I've been struggling with taxes for a while, but fortunately, Celine proposed a warehouse business, and I've been able to cut the taxes significantly. It was a bit of heavenly luck. You don't even know what you're talking about. Who helped you? Celine? In the first place, you made me suffer because of the tax matter. As if to prove that he was not the biological father of Celine, he showed his foolish side. Asher answered with his eyes squinted because of laughter. Oh, you did. Lady Celine is very intelligent indeed. I guess that's why I'm after her restlessly. Oh my gosh. The Countess had already uttered a lot of exclamations that she couldn't even count how many it was, and the conversation ended with Celine being praised. It was a matter of course. Today's main characters were Celine and Asher, and Celine had some commendable achievements, deserving the praise. It was quite natural to take such steps. Lyra's face was pale, unable to put anything in her mouth the whole time because the table was uncomfortable. Sometimes she stared at her father, who complimented Celine. Darian, on the other hand, gritted his teeth because of the friendly conversation that were happening, and he didn't touch the food in front of him as well. Nevertheless, he was afraid of his future and could not show it. Celine, who glanced sideways at the two, smiled and opened her mouth. Father and Mr. Asher, don't say that. I still can't catch up to Lyra. She's the best aristocratic spirit I have to emulate. Chapter 160. Who would think so? When Celine deliberately pretended to be modest enough to know that no one thought so, it suddenly turned into an atmosphere of pouring cold water. None of them were positive, but this was enough to shame Lyra. For someone who didn't know, she would look like a saint to cover up her sister who had damaged her, but Asher, who knew Celine's true self, broke his silence and opened his mouth because he realized what she was trying to do. Did you? I didn't know that at all. I wonder what kind of person she is going to be because Lady Celine's praise is so great. The Count must be secure since you have two wise daughters. Thank you. It was as if he had never heard it before, and the Count answered by wiping his forehead with a handkerchief, and Lyra swallowed shame by blushing under her eyes. It was better to be scolded. However, she could not be angry or away from the place where even the Crown Prince was watching. Darian, who had seen the situation, stepped in to mediate. Didn't you say you're here to get the permission? The topic about Lyra was not very important, so it quickly changed. Celine, who was watching Lyra's ugly scene, also looked curious. She wanted to hear it in person even though she was expecting it. Ah, yes. Asher also seemed to have no intention of wasting time on useless things anymore, and he got to the point. He thought that it would be better to take a walk alone with Celine while looking around the mansion than this boring spectacle he was having with Celine's family members. I have already confessed to her and have a date with her, but I also thought it would be better for me to get formal permission from you. Maybe. He was asking permission from the Count and Countess, but his gaze was on Celine. It was as if he was asking for her permission instead. It's likely to be more than that. I've been talking to her in advance, but I thought it would be better to ask for your permission. More than that? There was only one more thing left. Although she had expected it, she couldn't show any reaction as if she was shocked to hear such a remark directly from the Crown Prince. The difference between imagination and reality had brought silence. What else can I say? I can't say no to him even if I want to. In the garden where silence had fallen, Celine responded quietly with a smile. What do you think, Count and Madam? Yes. Yes, yes, in embarrassment, the Count replied, stammering heavily. It was an unknown answer whether he liked it or not. Your Highness doesn't need to ask permission. If you like each other, then that's what you should do. And the Countess answered with tears in her eyes as if she had been proposed to. She prayed for a rise in status that no one had ever achieved. It seemed like they were done eating because everyone's hands had stopped, and Celine asked Asher, who had taken a few sips of prepared tea without delay. His face was full of happiness. "Mr. Asher, why don't you take a look around the indoor garden my mother has arranged by herself? Is there such a great place? I really want to look around. Then I'll leave first." Celine, one of the people who should be surprised more than anyone else by what he said just now, stood up with a bright smile, and the Count nodded like a broken doll. And next to him, the Countess looked sad as if she wanted to be with her. As soon as the two disappeared toward the indoor garden, the Countess ordered the servants and maids to hurry up and tidy up the garden and the mansion a little more. Taking advantage of the gap, Lyra called the Count, who had stood up from his seat with a slightly dazed face. "Father." Her face, when she called, looked as if she had lost the world. "Lyra? Is something wrong? Did anything happen to make Lyra look like this?" The Count, who could not remember that even if there was something, hurried up to her, worrying. Then Lyra was wary and looked around for a moment, and then she said what was bothering her in a low voice. "His Highness the Crown Prince and Celine never match." "No way." Lyra sounded desperate. "What do you mean?" When the Count asked her as if he didn't know why, she expressed her opinion with reasons. "You've decided to help the princess. By the way, how can you think of allowing my stepsister to date the Crown Prince? Helping the princess, wasn't that to check His Highness?" "Yes. I did." "Why is your answer in the past tense when you said yes?" Lyra furrowed her forehead and began to persuade the Count again. "In addition, you are the one who has led the aristocratic party yourself. I can't believe you're about to have a relationship with the imperial family now. Are you sure you don't mind if all the efforts you've made come to nothing? You're thinking of wearing that kind of shame? You're not. Lyra. If you show such a disappointing appearance, I'm sure the aristocratic party will be scattered. They just got back together." "Lyra, I know what you're thinking, so calm down a little bit." Lyra kept talking with great excitement, and the Count gave a light pat on her shoulder and calmed her down. It was a pat to fully understand her mind even though he didn't understand it at all. "Of course, I agree with you. But it's not that easy to decide. Isn't he the Crown Prince? Besides, he likes Celine so much, and we can take advantage of him." The Count, who seemed to be excited, had realized what could be gained from Celine and Asher's relationship. "I've been reporting to the Duke at last, so I'll have to ask him for an opinion." Other nobles also agreed that it would be a waste if we kick him out. "Father." Lyra held the Count's sleeve to the nuance that he did not want to stop her from getting married. It was her begging, "Please don't do that." "Well, I'll go check to see if there's anything else to prepare for, and let's talk about it later." The Count had no intention of missing this rare opportunity, and it was Lyra's persuasion that was eventually thrown out. It was because of the attitude that Mr. Asher showed today that he had made up his mind. Asher's attitude, as if he would have presented the whole world to Celine, moved the Count. "Lyra." It was none other than Darian who called the name of Lyra while staring at the Count's disappearing back. He must have overheard the Count and Lyra's conversation, and his expression was very serious. The poor Lyra, who lost the Count, clung to her brother this time. He also had such a miserable face as if he lost his country in a crushing defeat in the war. "Brother." "Yes. Let's go up to your room first." Unlike Lyra, Darian tried not to show what he was thinking of. How can he deal with the Crown Prince himself? The angrier he got, the more miserable he would be. In addition, Celine was his younger sister, even though they did not have any blood relation in the first place, unless the Count got divorced. And since there was no sign to estrange between the Count and Countess, he was almost in a state of abandonment. But Lyra wasn't. She had a mission to separate Celine from Asher. It was a mission that she must succeed this time. After losing Alicia, she no longer had a shield, so she had to walk on her own. "You don't want her involved with the Crown Prince?" Darian nodded at the straightforward question. Unlike giving up because the situation was not right, he couldn't hide his unwanted feelings. So Lyra, who grabbed Darian's sleeve, took him to an empty lounge because she needed a helper after she had lost Alicia. And she had no doubt that Darian would be a very appropriate and useful helper. Let's stop our father together. I'll never get her involved with the crown prince. Lyra, what are you talking about? How can we disagree if they like each other? Even if our father opposes it, if they push ahead with it, there is nothing we can do. Darian replied as if it was not worth discussing to Lyra, who was eager to persuade him. What do you mean? If things go on like this, the family of Count Vermont might be in big trouble. We might get cursed if we become traitors.